Wait for him to put his jacket on. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're starting a little early because we're going to start with our Cottonwoods Maintenance District meeting. So can we please have a roll call?
Board Chair Dickey. Vice Board Chair McMahon. Here. Board Member Friedel. Present. Board Member Grzybowski. Board Member Toth.
Present.
Board Member Kalavianakis.
Here.
Board Member Skillicorn.
Present.
Thank you. We'll get started. David, please.
Good evening, Chair and board members. This is our final Cottonwoods budget meeting. This is adopting the tax levy to send to the assessor's office. We've got a total of 58 parcels. The budget for next fiscal year requires $168.42 per parcel. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions or comments? Speaker cards? No?
No speaker cards.
Thank you. The motion's on page 3. Can I get a motion, please? Page 3 of that agenda.
Move to adopt resolution CMD 2023-03.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Board Member Toth.
Aye.
Board Member Grzybowski.
Aye.
Board Member Friedel. Aye. Board Member Kalavianakis.
Aye.
Board Member Skillicorn.
Yes.
Board Vice Chair McMahon. Aye. Board Chairman Dickey.
Aye. Thank you. We'll just adjourn. And now we'll start a couple minutes early, our regular meeting. Welcome, everyone. Please stand for the pledge. If you like, remain standing for the invocation. Thank you so much. We have Steve Gay from the Fountain Hills Democratic Club and a former airline pilot to do our invocation tonight. Welcome.
Good evening. Through the millennia, we, as a society, have learned that the best way to govern the people is for the people to govern themselves. In 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America, remarked in amazement on this tendency of Americans to participate in local government. He wrote, "How does it happen that everyone takes as zealous an interest in the affairs of his township, his county, and the whole state as if they were his own? It is because everyone in his own sphere takes an active part in the government of society." It's been almost 200 years, and we, the people, have not let Tocqueville down when it comes to our passion for self-governance at every level. Today, in this tradition, we travel from our homes and businesses across the city to participate in this vibrant and animated laboratory of democracy. Citizens, staff, and elected officials converge on this chamber to work as one community, united and indivisible by nearly every measure. Each of us arrives as individuals with unique ideas and experiences, and we all have a desire, in the spirit of goodwill, to accommodate the needs of others. Citizens request assistance and offer their concerns. We are ever grateful for their interest and for their trust in the process. Our staff provides expert advice in their particular field, and we truly appreciate their continued service. Elected officials listen, debate, and choose the path forward for all of us out of a sincere desire to serve and honor the people of Fountain Hills, all while shaping its future. We offer our thanks to these public servants in that often thankless task. When we leave this chamber tonight, let us carry with us this same spirit of service and goodwill tomorrow and every day that follows. This is how we assemble to serve and to govern ourselves. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Vice Mayor McMahon. Here. Councilmember Friedel. Present. Councilmember Grzybowski.
Present.
Councilmember Toth.
Present.
Councilmember Calavianakis.
Here.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Present.
Anyone wishing to address the council regarding items listed on the agenda or under call to the public should fill out a request to comment card located in the back of the council chambers and hand it to the town clerk prior to consideration of that agenda item. When your name is called, please approach the podium, speak into the microphone, and state your name for the public record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. It is the policy of the mayor and council to not comment on items brought forth under call to the public. However, staff can be directed to report back to the council at a future date or to schedule items raised for a future council agenda.
Thank you, Linda. We'll start with our reports by the town manager and council members. Town manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight I have 2 updates, and they both are recommendations and kudos to our staff. Our first goes to our planning staff. By state statute, we have to do an update on our general plan and its status, and that's part of our consent items tonight. It's not something we're going to talk about, but I do want to commend staff on doing a fantastic job on that report, and recommend if anyone is interested, it is in our packet, so you can find it online. It's a report that talks about the progress and the implementation of our of our general plan. It's a 10-year plan. It's easy to sort of put a plan on a shelf. That is not what we do with this, and staff's done a great job putting that together, so I commend them. I also want to pause. I know we're going to talk about Parks and Recreation Month a little bit, but I wanted to commend our community services staff on a number of successful programs this summer. We often get told that there's not a lot to do here in the summer. It gets quiet, and both our rec staff as well as our community center staff put together a lot of programs to make that to fill that void, to make sure that we have a lot of activities. So we just had our pizza party. We're getting ready to have our ice cream social over at our community center. And then Saturday night, we just hosted our party in the park, where we had almost 200 residents out at our parks enjoying some games and activities and stargazing. And then we have a number of programs, including our Wacky Wet Wednesday and our Splash Pad Summer Series. So if you're not familiar with those, or if you're looking for something to do this summer, I highly suggest hopping online and checking those out. They're really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no report this week, Mayor. Thank you.
I attended the Arizona Alliance for Livable Communities meeting. They define themselves as a group of volunteers that work at the intersection of planning and public health. They just won the 2023 Trails for Health Award from American Trails and the Advancing Trails Awards program. So that was kind of cool. It's also a mouthful. You have to write it down. We had the Arizona League Budget Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting where we discuss resolutions that we think make sense to follow and hope that our state legislators take a hold of. And I think we've got a couple of good ones that are coming before your committee at the league conference this year. Also, I had an opportunity to meet with Jen from Cox Communications, where we talked about some of the things that Cox is working on, including their grant program and any upcoming system upgrades. And that was my past however many weeks that was.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of updates from around town. I've been out to Golden Eagle Park a couple of times this week and watching them replace the lights out there. So it's kind of exciting to see that project progressing. So good job on that, Rachel, and your parks people. And also had the opportunity to go by the skate park again, which isn't officially open. However, it's been very busy down there. And also just a little reminder that our grand opening is this Saturday night, right? 6:30 at the skate park. So the town did a great job of renovating that, and it looks great, and it's going to be an exciting night out there. So if you're not doing anything, pop on by. Also, staff and I met out at Adero Canyon we received, well, I received several comments from people about parking out there at Adero Canyon at the trailhead. So I met with staff out there, and we went over a couple of different options out there, and the staff is right now gathering some data, and we'll come back with some options as to addressing that issue out there. So I appreciate the staff's time and patience with me out there. So that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thanks, everybody, for coming out this afternoon to support your Cottonwoods Maintenance District and your town council. We really appreciate this. Fountain Hills is blessed to have such an engaged citizenry. Now, also, I'd like to thank everybody on Cox Channel 11 and live streaming and on YouTube for attending our meeting tonight. Very important. 2 weeks ago, I attended the League of Arizona Cities and Towns Public Safety, Military Affairs, and Courts Policy Making Committee. This committee is to provide an opportunity for the city and town officials to form across the state to provide expertise and direction on the policy issues that come before the League. This week, we discovered body scanning machines that are currently prohibited by state law from being in jails, even though it's in prisons and other forms of incarceration. And so we voted unanimously to include body scanning machines in jails for the protection of the corrections officers and the intake staff. And so that'll wend its way through the system now. I also was fortunate enough to attend the State of the Chamber breakfast this past week with our CEO and President Betsy Lavoie. It was a very good event. She described the state of the chamber for the past year and what's coming up in the future. It was a very interesting, very fascinating presentation. I also had a chance to meet with Attorney General Chris Mays, the Attorney General of Arizona, a very fascinating woman, and I had a very good conversation with her. She's very interesting. I also had a chance to go to Sheriff Joe Arpaio's 91st birthday last week. And no matter what you think about Sheriff Joe, I think we all aspire to get to be 91 years old. So congratulations, Sheriff, on that. And apparently in the Fountain Hills Times today, they had a report on a racehorse that was named after Sheriff Joe. So we'll have to track that progress and maybe place a wager or two to see how his racehorse does. So anyway, that's all I have for you this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Skillicorn?
No report at this time.
Thank you. There was a behavioral health fraud meeting with the governor's office on the phone with Access also. It was very informative, as was the chamber breakfast. Chris Mays talked about that, the crackdown on that, and then also fentanyl, border and senior fraud, and AI issues. So it was a lot going on. I'll get to be part of what they call an experts within presentation representing the town of Fountain Hills to visitors at our Dark Skies nationally recognized exhibit at the Smithsonian in DC next month. I'm going to be bringing brochures and T-shirts, and Bo's been getting a lot of town stuff together for me to bring. I'll have like a kiosk, and so I'll be pushing for Fountain Hills in our Dark Skies. While we're there, we're going to go to the National Museum of African American History. I want to mention Abraham Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, which freed the slaves under Union control, but slavery remained in Confederate states until the Union troops arrived. So on June 19th, 1865, they went to Texas, which was the westernmost state. And on that day, 250,000 enslaved people were freed by executive decree, and that's the celebration that became known as Juneteenth, and that was yesterday. So I have 3 proclamations. I'll point them out, then I'll come down one by one. The first one is the Parks and Rec Month proclamation, and I think I'll be giving that to Kevin Snipes and some other folks from the department that I see, and Trudy Petty, who is on our Community Services Advisory Commission. Next, I would be giving one for Professional Engineers Day proclamation. And I have to say the language, when I got it sent to me, was on an email with graph paper stationery, so I'm wondering who sent that to me, David. It was very, very Well, it was nice. The last proclamation is going to be the Coast Guard Auxiliary. I'll be presenting that to some folks. Division Commander John Dutzen, and I'm going to ask Councilwoman Brenda Calvinakis to come down and join us for that one because she is a member of the auxiliary. So. I'll read it, you hold it. With the big writing here. So there you go. Come on, guys. Very nice. All right, whereas Parks and Recreation is an integral part of communities throughout the country, including the town of Fountain Hills, and whereas Parks and Rec promotes health and wellness, improving the physical and mental health of people who live near parks, whereas Parks and Rec promotes time spent in nature, which positively impacts mental health by increasing cognitive performance, really? And well-being, alleviating illnesses such as depression, attention deficit disorders, and Alzheimer's. And Parks and Rec encourages physical activities by providing space for popular sports, hiking trails, swimming pools, and many other activities designed to promote active lifestyles and ensures that ecological beauty of our community, providing a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas Parks and Rec is a leading provider of healthy meals, nutrition services, and education, and Parks and Rec programming and education activities such as out-of-school time programming, youth sports, and environmental education are critical to childhood development. And whereas Parks and Recreation increases the community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of that local tax base, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction, this quality of life, right? And Parks and Rec is fundamental to the environmental well-being of our community and to the essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our community resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. And whereas the U.S. House Representative designated July as Parks and Rec Month, therefore, let it be resolved that the Town of Fountain Hills Council July is recognized as Park and Recreation Month, recognizing the benefits derived from parks and recreational resources. There you go. Thank you. You have to say them.
Well, this is just some of our staff that's here tonight, but I wanted to bring them up, and I can't tell you how hard all these people work to provide the fantastic Parks, Rec, Community Center, senior services, volunteers. They do it all. So, you know, it's definitely a team effort. We're a small group, but we do a lot for the town. As Rachel was saying earlier, there's a lot to do. You just have to take a look on our website, and you'll see that there's plenty to do all summer long. Come on out and join us.
Thank you. You get a picture?
Did you miss it already? You only get so many chances. This group's working.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, bet. Here we go. Next, I think we'll have David come up, and yes, Andy. All righty. You can do the honors there. Whereas licensed professional engineers have impacted our world in extraordinary ways, from the clean water we drink to the roads we travel, the energy we use, the food we eat, the clean air we breathe, and the cars we drive. And whereas Arizona licensed professional engineers have made significant contributions to our town, our state, and our nation. And whereas the economy has grown in part because licensed professional engineers have been and continue to be instrumental to our community through application of their engineering knowledge and skills. And whereas August 2nd, 2023 has been declared Professional Engineers Day by the National Society of Professional Engineers, an organization of 35,000 that represents the interests of licensed professional engineers in all 50 states and 3 territories. And since 1949, the Arizona Society of Professional Engineers has actively promoted and advanced the interests of licensed professional engineers for the betterment of public health, safety, and welfare through ethical conduct and professionalism. So now, therefore, I, Ginny, Mayor of the Town of Fountain Hills, proclaim August 2nd, 2023 as Professional Engineers Day in Fountain Hills and call upon citizens, parents, public and private agencies, businesses, hospitals, and schools in the town to join with the Society of Professional Engineers in supporting efforts to increase public awareness of the valuable service that licensed professional engineers provide to our community for the betterment of public health, safety, and welfare for all. Thank you. You have to say a few words.
Thank you. Well, thank you. On behalf of the National Society of Professional Engineers, the Arizona Society of Professional Engineers, and all licensed professional engineers, thank you for this recognition. Personally, it has been a privilege to serve our citizens, the mayor, and council with our prime responsibility to keep the town of Fountain Hills safe, operational, and beautiful. I, along with our Director of Public Works, Justin Weldy, Assistant Town Engineer, Andy Whistler, PE, our Street Superintendent and street crew, our Facilities Manager, and our Engineering Inspector value the opportunities to collaborate with the Town Manager, other town departments, and professional engineering consultants to design and oversee town projects that not only enhance the Fountain Hills experience for our citizens and visitors, but most importantly, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. As a licensed professional engineer, I have a solemn obligation to do so, which I proudly submit to. So I thank you for your trust in us and the continued opportunity to utilize our experience, knowledge, and skill in discharging the duties as your town engineer and assistant town engineer, and for the recognition of Professional Engineers Day. So thank you.
All right. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. All right, now. National Guard folks, come on up. Coast Guard. See? I'll write it down. All right, I'm sorry about that. There you go. So, Mr. Dutzen, correct? Yes, that's right. All right, come on up here. Thank you. This is you're the division commander, correct? Ms. Good?
Jenny Good, she's a flotilla commander.
Welcome. Read this now. Whereas on June 23rd, 1939, the United States Congress authorized the formation of the Coast Guard's Volunteer Reserve, and whereas the Coast Guard Auxiliary has... You're supposed to come down here. I said the word auxiliary and it reminded me. Coast Guard Auxiliary has grown and evolved remarkably over the last 8 decades as an organization of enthusiastic volunteers dedicated to the promotion of recreational boating safety throughout the United States and its territories. The men and women who serve in the auxiliary have selflessly devoted time, skills, and expertise across an increasingly diverse array of roles and missions to assist the Coast Guard and to preserve and protect our nation's maritime interests. And whereas the Coast Guard Auxiliary and its 127 members throughout Arizona dedicated in 2022 in excess of 18,600 volunteer hours, performed over 400 vessel safety checks, and assisted in distributing over 800 life jackets. And whereas the Coast Guard Auxiliary's service and strength are defined by its core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty, and their motto is Semper Paratus, always ready. And whereas the Coast Guard Auxiliary, part of Team Coast Guard, actively patrols Arizona waterways along with performing shoreside shoreside public affairs and recreational boating safety missions in the interest of recreational boating safety. So therefore, I, Jenny, recognize Friday, June 23rd, 2023, the 84th birthday of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary as Coast Guard Auxiliary Day in the town of Fountain Hills, and call the observance to the attention of our citizens. Thank you. We're going to clap, and then you say something.
I want to give big thanks to Fountain Hills resident Jack Pauley, who is the immediate past Vice Division Commander, for organizing this and doing the first. This will be on Friday, the 23rd, will be the first time that we've celebrated a Coast Guard Auxiliary Day. About 2 years ago, we did Coast Guard Day, which was August 4th, the birthday of the Coast Guard. But this is the birthday of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. It started in 1939 as Boaters Helping Boaters. And a lot of people think, you know, what is the Coast Guard doing in Arizona? Everybody always asks us, who do you fly for? We're like, well, no, we're not pilots. We're the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So there's three branches or three legs of the Coast Guard. One's the active duty folks, one's the reserve, you know, that you're familiar with. And then we're the civilian component, uniform component. We help out. There's only 5 active duty Coast Guard people in the entire state of Arizona. So we go ahead and we do the things like the boating safety patrols and give out life jackets and whatnot. But one of the neat things we do is I'll have Miss Good talk about it. She's the head of the band flotilla, and we're going to have a performance on Friday.
Thank you, Commander. Yes, I'm Jenny Good, and I'm the flotilla commander of 10-3. We are the Arizona Band Flotilla, and we perform throughout the Valley and even in places like California. We serve our veterans, and we perform at patriotic events, and we're proud to do so. So,
Come out this Friday,
yes,
8
yep,
o'clock.
you'll see us there.
Just thank you, Ms. Mayor, for your participation in this beautiful ceremony. We really appreciate it. And for the 21,000 Coast Guard auxiliaries out there, we give you our thank you.
Vice Mayor will be at that event. I'm going to be away, so looking forward to hearing about it. All right, proclamation. Our next, we have no presentations. Next is call to the public. Do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, we do, Mayor. We have 3 speaker cards at this moment. First up is Crystal Kavanaugh, and on deck is Matthew Corrigan.
Good evening, Mayor Dickey, Vice Mayor McMahon, Councilman Friedel and Skillicorn on the phone, Councilwoman Kalavianakis and Toth, and of course, our sis Councilwoman Grzybowski. Thanks to those of you who did put residents first when you really whether you really wanted to or not, by voting to oppose the Mountainside rezone. Although a biased, inaccurate article in AZ Bex followed, which mischaracterized our town as anti-development by the developer, his attorney, our own councilwoman who spoke of fixing it with a revote, and from our own chamber leadership who used the word stagnant to describe Fountain Hills. When I last looked, there were several ongoing projects and developments here, and no problem selling our beautiful homes to newcomers here in Fountain Hills for a nice price. Maybe we just like selective development for our unique topography and scenic views instead of towering urban studio apartments that diminish our neighborhoods. So on this topic, regarding the Senderos property, the town needs to stick to its existing regulations without waiving any requirements or making special deals. I certainly wish Mr. Wesley would have been more concerned with the impact on residents in my neighborhood before approving the rooftop pergola monstrosity on Cat Claw that sits at least 30 feet into the air in Sunridge Canyon. I expected that a request to rezone the Fountain Area Hotel into apartments would be on the agenda tonight when I left last month's P&Z meeting, along with a request to expand the number of people in a neighborhood community residence. The operators there want an SUP to allow 16 people plus staff. This would actually double what our current ordinance allows. This simply lines the pockets of the operators with excess money, but would not improve the care of the current 10 elderly residents in this residential neighborhood home. At 10, they were already grandfathered in from the current code. Hopefully, when either issue comes before you, you will again put residents first. With regards to any hotel rezone, look down the road at the consequence of getting rid of the only downtown hotel, while at the same time bringing in a dark sky observatory tourist destination, or while striving to recruit economic development. Stand strong against any developer that threatens the hotel could be used to house illegals or the homeless if apartments aren't approved. We do indeed need to monitor that issue, though, because hotel vouchers for the homeless was already a topic by our state government. The governor actually vetoed a House bill that tried to protect our tourism industry from these vouchers. Please continue to consider our residents and unique community first. Just because other places allow things to happen does not mean it's right for Fountain Hills. We do not need to unnecessarily bring the insanity of other locations here. Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, council members, Matthew Corrigan, homeowner of Fountain Hills. Really two subjects or topics tonight, and one is rezoning, zoning, and let me start with the first. So later tonight, the council will hear from a rezoning applicant who wants to expand to single-family residence, which I applaud, but they do so wanting the council to set a precedent by changing open space to single-family housing for the purpose of enlarging the property. Does this then open the door to others who expect similar rezoning preference for home additions? Just a question. Second topic, number two. The council plans to discuss the problem of vagrancy under the misnomer of homelessness. I would caution the council from aligning with MAG, Human Resources Program, and their new director and former Phoenix City Manager, Ed Zierscher. I do not know and have not met Ed Zierscher, but I do know the failed history of Phoenix lawless, crime-ridden, massive city government-approved slum encampment known as the Zone in Phoenix. This increased under the watch of Ed Zierscher. Please align and support organizations that have success with substance abuse and mental illness. Phoenix Rescue Mission, for example, might be one that comes to mind. They are a 501c3 Christ-centered charity with a 91% Charity Star rating. Government solutions offer a carrot without a stick. In other words, all participants are rewarded for failure to change rather than rewarded for success. That's a problem. This is all done at taxpayers' expense. MAG Human Services' goal, according to their website, is support progress in creating an equitable human services delivery system for marginalized populations, incorporating perspectives of people with lived experience as well as perspective reflecting diversity and inclusion of race, ethnicity, religion, sex, disability, age, gender identity, and sexual orientation. I've noticed a consistency with government programs, solutions on any issue. Number one, success is measured by the number of participants in the program. Number two, if the government program fails, more taxpayer money is poured into it. Number three, government programs never get smaller or go away. They only grow and create more bureaucracy. Four, government officers in bureaucracies are not elected and not accountable really to anyone. I've also noticed that cities and towns that create ordinances to discourage vagrancy and then enforce these ordinances have less vagrancy, panhandling, loitering, and illegal camping. Thank you.
Next, we have Lori Troller.
Mayor, Council, Rachel, Aaron. Rachel, you mentioned general plan. I just want to bring this up real quick. There's a state requirement that telecommunication type ordinances comply with our general plan, and our general plan has Zippo in it for telecommunications, doesn't mention towers, anything. There's nothing in there. So it's not in the 7 strategic plans either. So those need to be updated. The other item is, can we get an update on the actions taken from the the lawyer interviews for the broadband stuff? I know I'm not going to get an answer. I just put the question out there. Thank you.
We will be. I think a press release was put out. A press release? Okay. It already was put out? Okay. Is that it?
Yes, that is it.
Thank you. So, Lori, there was a press release put out. Oh, okay, thank you. All right. Our next is our consent agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
So move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Madam Mayor.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Alan?
Yes, Madam Mayor, there is an item that I would like to take off of it to discuss. It's the one that involves transit.
Okay. So we can approve the consent agenda items A, B, and C, and we have a second. All those, roll call, please.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Friedel.
Aye.
Councilmember Kalavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Aye.
Councilmember Toth.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McMahon.
Aye.
Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you. So as per our rules, the first item will be what was the previous consent agenda, item D, which is about approving our IGA with our PTA, Valley Metro. Rachel?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm actually going to ask David Trimble to join us. He kind of is our liaison for our Valley Metro relationship, and I think he can probably outline this pretty quickly for us.
And Alan, step in if you have any specific questions, please.
Sure, yes, this is to kind of continue with the status quo from what we've been doing since approximately 2014, 2015. And really, we updated the bus service in 2021, kind of as a pilot program. So the town has their two essential transportation services. One's the express bus service. It travels in the morning twice and then brings folks back in the afternoon. And then the other program that the town has is the Ride Choice program. That's the on-demand service where folks with either disabilities or over 65 can request a ride through either Uber or Lyft or the contractors that Valley Metro has. Currently, these programs are funded through PTF monies, and that's the Prop 400 monies, and then through the Arizona Lottery Fund. So there's no general fund monies that are outgoing at this time. Down the road, if the Ride Choice program continues to increase, we may want to look at that because it will potentially outstrip the monies that are coming in from those sources. I project that it'd be about maybe 4 years from now, but that assumes everything stays the same. If more people play the lottery, maybe we'll get more income. But that was a joke, but I don't think there'll be that many people playing the lottery. But yeah, as status quo, probably we'd want to look at things in 3 years to see what, if anything, we want to do differently there. That's kind of the background in a nutshell.
Councilman, did you have a specific question about this item?
Well, I want to thank Director Trimble. He did answer one of the questions, but I just want to confirm, especially based on our previous town manager saying like lottery funds and fund these. And I'm a big fan of the rider choice. I think it provides a good service. But the bus line, I have not seen a whole lot of use of it. I personally have tried it 3 times, and I've been the only person on there. Frankly, I think that those buses just sit there and idle for a couple hours every morning. But I see here that it was estimated that there was 36 people that were going to ride it, and it turns out there might be 1. So the question I have is, and this might just be an accounting, how this was accounted for, but it just under the headline of the PTF, it mentions the town amount is approximately $82,000 a year. Now, is that just a pass-through from the PTF funding, or what is that?
Mayor, Councilmember, the town does receive a total. Again, it can vary, but year to year, it's been approximately $82,000. 65,000 or so is allocated towards the 515 bus service, and then the balance of that goes toward the ride choice program for that total of approximately 82,000 that's coming in. So that can be used for both of the 2 sources, or the 2 programs.
Well, Councilman, when we...
So just to clarify...
Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, Director Trimble, just to clarify, that's $82,000 total, and it's all PTF, and the bus amount of that is $65,000. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Madam Mayor, Director Trimble, can we use that $65,000 to anything else?
It gets a little complicated. I would ask Valley Metro. We might want to contact them. I reached out via email. It does sound like we can potentially redirect that towards potentially the ride choice program, as long as the ride choice program continues to have the ridership that it does, or the usage that it does. So I think, and it gets a little murky with the different funding sources, but I believe that could be done.
I wanted to mention, Alan, that when we first had this, for years, the route was going into Scottsdale over by the library, but then we tried this not that long ago to try to have it go to the park and ride, hoping that would increase some of the ridership. I think some of it is that people don't know about it, and obviously it's one of those chicken and egg things too, when you only have the couple of trips in and out. But it's something that we should take a look at. I think that we can do that.
And we also, if I may, we implemented it. I think we started it during COVID, and I think a lot of the transportation, public transit stuff, ridership decreased during that time frame. So probably a combination of things. I don't know, but that could be a contributor too.
Thank you very much. Being on Valley Metro Board, we have a brand new CEO, Jessica Bedford Miller. She has been really, really proactive with Valley Metro, getting it out there and getting more advertising, letting communities know what services they have, what's available in their community, allocating funds, et cetera. So I think that there is going to be a lot more information out there, and a lot more of our community will become aware of the public transportation services that we provide. Plus, as a growing community, I think that the bus ridership will change based on that too. And also I know that the rideshare program it's really, really appreciated. And I have to say that I'm impressed because Jessica rides the bus transit into work whenever she can, and she does it almost every day. So she walks the walk and talks the talk, so it's good.
Councilman Skillicorn, can I ask Councilman Skillicorn a question? When you tested your bus, did you test from where did you start? Did you start from here in the morning and travel out? How did you travel?
Madam Mayor, Councilwoman Grabowski, I went twice from the library to the Mesa Park and Ride, and once in the evening took the Mesa Park and Ride back north to the library.
My fear is that's against traffic. Before we make a decision to pull this kind of thing, I think we need to talk to our local businesses, because our local retail workers and restaurant staff cannot afford to live here. And I remember that time I stalked my neighborhood and watched the cars and the people come and go. There are 2 people that I know took the bus that walked into my neighborhood in the mornings and out of my neighborhood in the afternoons because they had to go catch their bus. So I kind of feel like that's against traffic, that maybe it's more people coming into town in the morning and going out of town in the afternoon is my guess, just based off of my very brief surveys in the heat of the day stalking my neighbors. So I do feel like we should talk to our local businesses to see how their staffs commute in and out before we make this kind of decision. Not that we're planning on doing it now. I'm just saying we need to keep that in the back of our mind, because I do know of 2 people that live in my little tiny hood that use it regularly.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Isn't there a time frame in order to change anything, like a year or something like that? It takes a while to make a change, correct?
I asked that question of Valley Metro and have experience when we changed the route last time. They say it's 6 to 8 month time frame. They do the changes, implement changes twice a year, April and then October, and you really kind of have to have it set up more or less a year in advance. You kind of want to have those decisions made around a year in advance. So it's a topic maybe we can bring back at another time, or maybe at the retreat or whatnot, to get some more information on that if we want to look at that. So.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is brief. I'm a little hesitant to rely on anecdotal evidence as far as ridership is concerned, because I think you can pretty much prove anything you want to prove with anecdotal evidence. Do we have any hard data on ridership for both programs? And particularly in light of the fact that we could be on the hook financially in, say, 4 years from now, that we could actually track this data and find out, who's riding it, how many are riding it, what are the costs going to be eventually to our community?
Yeah, and the bus is a fixed cost for the community, so it doesn't matter how many, obviously, ride that one. The ride choice varies per ride, is what the town pays a portion of. In Valley Metro, to answer your question, does have those numbers. Again, the bus route bus ridership is very low. It was averaging 1 person riding that. Ride choice, on the other hand, seems to be increasing. 5-year average on that has been about 750 rides. That's one-way rides. Now this past year, it's doubled. It's 1,500. So people are learning about that program. It's affordable. They changed the terms on the ride choice program over the past few years, and now it's more or less $3 each way, limited to, I think, 50 miles. So, for $6, you can go to, say, a medical facility on 90th and Shea, or even, we have people that go over to Mayo off the 101. So they can do that now for $6, whereas the program before, that would have cost $30 or $40. So I think people are catching on to that.
If you could just clarify, those numbers were not specifically for our Fountain Hill stop, is that correct?
That is the numbers that I...
That is for Fountain Hills? Okay. I'll have to keep a better eye, because that number surprised me. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
I'm sorry, did you mean the bus?
Yeah, I think so.
You know what I did, so thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Councilman Skillicorn.
Thank you. I just want to, before we go ahead and make a motion here, I just want to point out that, if it's one person at $65,000, we could buy that person a Tesla and it'd be cheaper. And if it's just two out of Havenly, we could buy each one of them a Prius and save money. So we just want to make sure that point is taken. I think in the future we really want to go to that ride choice. It's just such a better program. It helps people get the doctor's appointments and things like that. I think it's very useful. And the days of mass transit, it's just not very popular. People don't like it, and it's failing all over the country. And it really only works in really high-density areas, and we don't live in a high-density area. So I would like to make a motion to approve these.
Thank you. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call?
Councilmember Friedel.
Aye.
Councilmember Kalavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
What did I
Aye.
Councilmember Toth.
Aye.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
I just want to make sure, is the motion to approve?
Yes.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McMahon.
I still want to know what the motion's for exactly, please.
Move to adopt Resolution 2023-24, correct?
As it is right now?
Yes.
Yes. Aye. Thank you for clarification.
Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you all very much. Okay, our next item is approving the Fourth Amendment to a purchasing agreement with Tanner. Justin?
Madam Mayor, council members, I've put together a short presentation for tonight just as a refresher about the level of investment in the town's streets and infrastructure over the last 8 years, leading up to and asking for your consideration about approving this amendment to this contract. It should be noted that with little to no exception, the M.R. Tanner companies have been involved in the pavement management program for the last 8 years and have worked with the town staff, manager, and council to reduce the overall cost. And I think that part right there is very, very important. Earlier this evening, you heard 2 reports, one paid for that provided an assessment and a group of dedicated volunteers that provided some recommendations and their findings. It should be noted that during that process, and I'll single myself out at this time, they were, at least one or more of them were angry at me because when they asked for pricing, I gave them the unit prices per the contract. And they argued that we were not paying anywhere near that amount of money for the services we were receiving, and it was misleading. My argument to those individuals was that at any time, the individual at M.R. Tanner's that is extending this price to the town for less than the unit price in which they were the low bidder for a multi-million-dollar contract could be gone, and we will be paying unit prices. And I was concerned about any reflection that was not accurate with the unit. The numbers that you saw tonight were a happy medium between unit prices and what we've actually been invoiced for and guidance from the town manager in those numbers. With that said, going back 8 years to 15, 16, this is what was allotted and spent. You've seen some of these images before. This is for 16, 17. As a reminder, all of those little red dots in there were the intersections where the pavement was in such poor condition there was nothing that could be done for it except to remove it and replace it. This is 17, 18. You were here earlier tonight. One of the presenters noted that the northeast corner of town had a lot of green lines in it. This is some of the reason why. This is 18, 19. This is 1920. 1920 has 2 slides. One of them was primarily the town center and the rest of them was residential. This is 2021. You'll note that some of the downtown is shown in this. The reason for that is we intentionally waited until the roundabout was done to pave the streets leading up to it or the primary access to the roundabout, so it would all be one new big project. This is the remainder of 21-22. Again, 2 slides. This is what we are doing this year. Earlier tonight, you saw a lot of green from past decisions that were good in regards to pavement management and maintenance. All of that investment needs the right treatment at the right time. We are at the 5 to 7 year mark, some cases a little over, closer to 8. We are doing the first treatment, which is crack filling and preservative seal, to protect that investment that was made nearly 8 years ago. This is a really big number right here. Over the past 8 years, I think it's important, and I did not include these numbers to avoid confusing anyone. During the past 8 years, $8 million was spent, about 8.6, to totally reconstruct Saguaro. That was a bond initiative that was paid off in 5 years. Also, back a little bit to 8 years and a little bit more, the intersection of Saguaro and Shea was completed. Just for boundary references, that is Saguaro just south of the Senor Taco, and it was on Shea from Technology to the State Route 87 right away, $2.7 million. That was Prop 400 money. Also during this time frame, Shea was repaved from Technology to the Scottsdale border for a little over $1 million. That was also Prop 400 money. I didn't include those last 3, and they're really big numbers, because I don't want people to get confused with the money that we use for pavement management and maintenance that's allotted by this council through the budget that's available and other funding sources that pay for those other types. Tonight, we are asking you to consider approving an amendment to a contract that we've been using for several years to spend primarily federal government monies on the streets that are listed up here. With little to no exception, the majority of these are pre-incorporation roads that are in that backlog that you saw that are primarily unsavable by any other treatment besides full depth reconstruction or a minimum of 2-inch mill and overlay reconstruction. It's a lot of money. Doesn't look like very much surface until you get down deep and dig deep into that map, but it's a considerable amount of work. Any questions in regards to the exhibits that I just showed you? I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you. Did we have any speaker cards on this item?
No, Mayor, we do not.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay.
Move to approve the 4th Amendment to the Cooperative Purchasing Agreement C 2020-065 with M.R. Tanner in the amount of $5 million and any required budget transfers.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Calavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Aye.
Councilmember Toth.
Aye.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Friedel.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McMahon.
Aye.
Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you. Thanks, Justin.
Thank
A
you.
night for roads, huh? And streets. Our next item is our discussion on issues surrounding homelessness. And this is for discussion only and to learn a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'll ask Rachel to please kick it off if that's okay.
Sure, happy to. Yes, this is a lot. It's a big conversation. Staff has worked for a number of weeks now trying to get our arms around how to guide this conversation. So we have 2 presentations tonight. They are not light and they are not easy, and I imagine there will be a lot of questions and a lot of conversation, so I want to encourage the council to have those, ask those questions. We may not have answers, but we do have a number of stakeholders in the room with us tonight. First is going to be Amy St. Peter with MAG. She's going to talk about homelessness in the context of the regional discussion, and then following her, we will have Captain Kratzer talk about some of the peripheral things and the secondary things associated with our community here. So with that, Amy?
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Rachel, Madam Chair and Mayor and members of the council, thank you very much for having me here tonight. I've been here before. We deeply appreciate our partnership with you. It is critical as we strengthen the regional response to homelessness that we work very closely with communities. Homelessness looks different in different communities. It manifests differently. It's to a different scale. And as such, any kind of solutions around homelessness really need to be very closely and intentionally aligned with the priorities, the preferences, the attributes, the capacity of each and every community. So solutions inherently have to be customized. They have to be different for each community. So we really appreciate the leadership that you've shown in this space, the opportunity to work with you in a really collaborative way. My purpose here tonight is to share with you some data about homelessness throughout the region and to be able to share with you some of those regional efforts and then to highlight some of the local activities underway as well. But we stand here in partnership with you. We are eager to help you in this conversation. It is multifaceted, it is very complex. But we know that by communicating really constructively and closely on an ongoing basis with each other, we'll have a better response, we'll have a better outcome. So thank you very much for that partnership, and I do invite your direction, your questions, your feedback, your ideas throughout this presentation and as we move forward. So with that, I did want to call to your attention, a lot of the data that I'll be sharing tonight is from the Homeless Management Information System. We are mining this data, particularly on a quarterly basis, to be able to be very transparent and to hold ourselves accountable, to be able to share the progress that's being made. And if progress is not being made, then we use this data to help us to realign our actions and to make any mid-course adjustments as needed. All of this data is available to you on the MAG website. It's available to your residents and to the residents throughout the region. So I encourage folks to go to the MAG website, and there you can see the quarterly report showing the trends in this homelessness data. And if you have questions about that data, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know, and we'd be happy to walk through that with you. So in terms of the data that we've pulled from the report for your information and for your discussion tonight, when we talk about how many people are experiencing homelessness right now, in our region we have just over 8,000 people. Those are people who are staying in shelters as well as those who are not in shelter but who otherwise don't have a place to call home. So maybe on their streets, they're in the riverbeds, they're in their cars. Many of them are working. They're working full-time jobs and they simply are not earning enough money to be able to afford a rent or a mortgage. And so this is how it's broken out right now. You'll see that the total number of households, again, in individuals, it's over 8,000 people. But in terms of households, it's just over 6,000. We have about 5,000 people who are single and on their own experiencing homelessness. And then we have families there down at the bottom. We do want to share, too, we ask people what is contributing to their homelessness, because the solutions to ending homelessness, to addressing homelessness, reducing it, really have to be intentionally formed around the reasons why people are experiencing homelessness. Very often, it's a multitude of different reasons. It's not always any one single thing. A lot of times, it's because they don't have that support system. So if you or I were to lose our jobs, we likely would be okay. We'd land on our feet. We would be able to recover from that. When people don't have a support system, they aren't able to recover as well. And so you see the economic factors are the #1 reason cited. And this data is from the Phoenix Rescue Mission. They're a very good partner in this space. We work with them very closely. They worked on this gaps analysis, and they interviewed more than 700, nearly 800 different people experiencing homelessness. So that's where this data is from before you today. So when somebody loses their job, they don't have, they're underemployed. They might be working part-time when they really need to be working at least full-time, but they simply can't find that job. So finance is money, they just don't have enough of it for various reasons. Health issues, substance use addiction is an issue, absolutely, as well as mental health issues, medical issues, disability. When people aren't able to work for a variety of reasons, they simply aren't able to maintain their housing. Also, we find that there are family issues involved. We see, unfortunately, all too often, particularly among youth who are on their own, so minors who are experiencing homelessness on their own, most often it's because they've been kicked out by their families. And very often they've been abused or neglected, and then they were kicked out. So they've experienced a very hard time while they still had a home, and they're experiencing an even harder time now that they do not have a home. and lack of affordable housing, lack of affordable rents and mortgages. This is absolutely critical. We find that, for example, older adults are disproportionately impacted by this as well. We find that there's been a 34% increase in older adults, people 65 and plus. If they're renting, they are living on a limited and fixed income, and they cannot afford the significant increases in rent that we're seeing across the region in a very significant way. Other responses, people have been evicted because of landlord issues, the legal system. We do have some people who report losing their homes as a result of COVID. Often that's because they lost their job. We lost a number of lower paying jobs during the pandemic, and we have not recovered those jobs yet. Also, again, if there's a disaster, an accident, we call it sometimes the flat tire syndrome. You know, they get that flat tire, they get into a car accident, they incur those bills, they lose their job, they lose their housing, and then they're in this very fast spiral downward into homelessness that's very difficult to recover from and to pull themselves out. I'm asked a lot, actually, well, what about the people who choose to experience homelessness? And 4% actually cited that as their reason. They said, yes, I'm choosing to experience homelessness. I'd like to offer that it's a very tempered choice. Sometimes they aren't able to enter shelter, say, for example, with their significant other, and they don't want to split up. Other times, they don't fit the demographics of people who are being screened into that program. So it's a tempered choice, but some people do say, yes, I want to be homeless, basically. So we're finding that there is an increase in the number of people entering the system who are new to the system. They've never needed help before, but they're needing help now. 34% of people entering the system right now are experiencing homelessness for the first time. So they don't know where to turn, and they are new to this whole situation, and they're struggling. They're struggling to get back on their feet. They're struggling to access help, and they're struggling to be able to obtain the housing and the stability that comes along with that housing. I would like to point out, too, that when we're looking at homelessness, we find that if we're looking at that from a per capita basis, that for every 25,000 people we have in the region, about 27 are experiencing homelessness. So that gives you an idea in terms of the scale and the scope that we're looking at right now. And this is really important to look at, too. Our inflow is greater than our outflow. We cannot build enough shelter, or for that matter, housing, to be able to end homelessness right now in our region. So to bring this down into more of a bite-sized piece, for every 21 people that we have entering the system, now keep in mind if there's 21 entering the system, about 7 of them are new to the system. They don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn. We only have 10% leaving in a positive exit, and a positive exit is that they're going into housing. So if you think of like a funnel, we have all these people coming into homelessness. We aren't helping enough people to leave the system in a really positive way. And so they're recycling back into homelessness. They're staying in shelters for an extended period of time. They're leaving on their own, but they're not leaving for housing. And so that's very much an issue and something that we're tracking pretty significantly right now. When we look at where are people experiencing homelessness, it really is all throughout the region. Now, it is in varying degrees. We see greater densities in some parts of the region, such as in some communities. We see very little visible homelessness in other parts of the region. But as you can see, throughout just about the whole region, there's some level of people experiencing homelessness. Now, those blue dots are people who are experiencing homelessness on a chronic basis. That means that they've been experiencing homelessness for a long time. They generally also do have some kind of qualifying disability. So they're physically or mentally not able to hold down a job, and they're not able to access housing because of that. The blue dots are people who are perhaps coming into homelessness for the first time, or they've been experiencing homelessness for a very short time period. Now, I do want to point out that all of these interactions are from the outreach teams. So if there's not an outreach team serving a particular area, we don't have data on that particular area. So it is really critical to partner with outreach teams. Not only do they give us better data in terms of where are people experiencing homelessness, but they also build those relationships that can help move people into housing. Sometimes we'll hear from folks that they get very frustrated because they'll say, well, this person was offered housing and they said no. But they might not say yes the first time around because of the trust issues and because of the severe trauma that they have likely experienced as they've experienced homelessness. And so maybe they say no the first time, but maybe they'll say yes a fifth or the sixth time. And in order to have that level of communication and engagement, you have to have outreach teams. And so outreach teams are really critical to addressing homelessness and bringing them into housing and helping them to maintain that stability. I do want to make sure that you're aware of all of the great data analytics that we have online on the MAG website. We have a lot of data about homelessness, but also about housing. Because when we're talking about homelessness, we have to be talking about housing. Shelters are wonderful. They're an important part of the solution. They're not the end goal, though. If we put somebody in shelter, they can start to stabilize. We're not ending their homelessness, though. So housing is a really critical factor. On the back end, as people are leaving homelessness, it's also critical to look at housing on the front end to try and prevent someone from experiencing homelessness as a result. So I'd like to offer some data that's a little bit more local in nature. So when we look at housing across the entire region, not specific at all to Fountain Hills, we know that we've experienced a serious decline in affordable rents and mortgages for people. And that is not always, but can very much be a precursor to them experiencing homelessness, keeping in mind that if they're severely cost burdened, if they're paying more than, say, 50% of their income every single month just on housing, if something happens, an unexpected medical bill, an unexpected car repair bill, for example, someone loses their job and it takes them a while to find another job, they're more likely to experience homelessness. And so when you look at home sales that are for $300,000 or less, you've lost about half of that since 2011. The picture, though, gets more stark when you look at rents. So when we look at rents under $1,000 a month, that used to be the majority of your market back in 2010. You haven't seen rents under $1,000 a month for the past few years now to any significant degree. We are seeing rents that are $2,000 or more per month. And when people are spending that much every single month just on housing, it puts them in a precarious financial situation and makes them more vulnerable. And you can see what happens. So renters are the most cost burdened, and they're cost burdened throughout the entire region. So that red color, that's more than 45% of the households living in that area are cost burdened. It means that they're spending more than 30% of their income every single month just on housing. There's almost 300,000 people across the region spending more than 30% of their income every single month just on their housing. When we look at severely cost-burdened households, they're spending more than 50%. And we have almost 150,000 renter households spending more than 50% of their income every single month just on housing. That leaves very little money for anything else, including food and medical care. In some populations, for example, older adults, we often see that older adults are choosing between, do I pay for my rent or do I pay for my medication? I need my medication to live. I can't pay my rent this month. And then they're experiencing homelessness as a result. So for all these reasons and more, we started to strengthen the regional response to homelessness back in 2020. We worked very, very closely with you, with our other local and tribal governments throughout the entire region to develop a regional homelessness action plan specific to local and tribal governments. In May of 2021, we had 14 strategies that were adopted that were broader in nature and very inclusive of a number of different sectors. In December of 2021, our regional council unanimously approved Pathways Home. Thank you very much for your support with that. We're excited to highlight that that was a unanimous vote because it meant that every single community throughout the region was part of this process and they supported this plan. And they continue to support the plan in terms of its implementation moving forward. These are the three main areas of activity that are highlighted in this plan. Committing to work regionally, we recognize that we can do better and more together than we can do on our own. Homelessness is truly a regional issue. It's not up to any one sector and it's not up to any one community. And so it's being able, for example, to share data, to share resources. And we're doing that more now than we have before because of all of our local and tribal governments coming together. We can't solve homelessness without housing, and so we have a goal of increasing safe housing options. That includes temporary housing such as shelter and rapid rehousing, as well as permanent supportive housing. We track our housing targets each month, the number of housing units needed to address the current need changes every month. And so we're updating that and we're working very closely with our stakeholders. I do want to point out something concerning about the housing options right now. For temporary housing, we've just about doubled our shelter beds since the pandemic. So that's good news because more people now are able to access shelter and they're able to start putting their lives back together. What's concerning is that many of those beds, a majority of those beds are funded with COVID federal dollars, which means that that funding will eliminate will be eliminated in about 2 years. So we only have 2 years to come up with alternative funding or solutions to house people who are in those shelter beds right now and who will be in those shelter beds over the next 2 years. So we're working very closely with a variety of funding partners, public, private, nonprofit, to try and make sure that we have a good plan in place so we can continue to meet the needs that only continue, unfortunately, to increase. This work inherently involves multi-sectors, and so we're working with very diverse partnerships to address homelessness. That includes healthcare, the criminal justice system, just a variety of different stakeholders, because again, it takes everybody working together to make progress in this space. And so communities across the region are responding. Some of them are enhancing the work that they've had maybe underway for a number of years. We have a lot of communities, though, stepping into this space for the first time and trying new things. And we're seeing some really good progress there. We have some communities who are working very closely with nonprofit partners, for example, to provide really critical shelter, housing, and services to people. Sometimes the local or tribal government is very directly involved. Other times they might, for example, give the funding to another partner who can then contract with nonprofit agencies to provide those services. What's showing particularly good progress right now is that flexible funding to help people avoid eviction and to be able to acquire prevention resources. So sometimes people don't necessarily need support with housing, but they might need help, for example, with daycare for a month until they can get their first paychecks and set up really good care, and then they're able to proceed on their own. So sometimes if people can just get a little bit of help at the right moment, it's enough to keep them from entering the system in the first place. And I do want to thank you in regard for your support, particularly for that last bullet point, Home is Where It All Starts. That is our new public education campaign. You help to provide funding to support those regional media buys. homeiswhereitallstarts.org is a website where you can go to access the information. We do have a toolkit available. We encourage people across all sectors to go to that website, to download the toolkit, and then really to use that. You can use that with social media, with your website, and your communications. We need to reshape the narrative around affordable housing, instead referring to affordable rents and mortgages, homes within reach, homes that meet our needs, because we need to be able to have this conversation about homelessness, about housing, and we can do that if we develop a shared language that is more inclusive and really brings more people into that conversation. We want to highlight a current program that's underway right now that's life-saving. Our regional heat relief network is activated. That always starts with the first day that it hits 100 degrees. None of us are happy when it gets that hot. And when people are experiencing homelessness, it's even less so, because they're very much exposed to the elements, and many people lose their lives each summer, whether they're experiencing homelessness or they're working outdoors, or sometimes, for example, they're living on a fixed income. They have a home, but they don't have enough money to turn on those utilities, and they die because it gets so hot in their home. So thank you very much for participating in the Regional Heat Relief Network. We are tracking who's able to offer water and to collect, so both to give water out to people who need it, as well as to collect water donations and to be able to disperse that to agencies who can provide that support. Also the cooling centers, the refuge locations, those are really critical. Sometimes people just need to be able to come in out of the heat during the day, and then they can make it through the summer. But this is a critical program that's only possible because of the support that's received from local and tribal governments like Fountain Hills, as well as from nonprofit agencies and faith-based partners throughout the region. That is my contact information. That is my direct line. That is my email address. I encourage anyone to reach out to me if you have questions, ideas, comments, feedback. Would love to be able to continue this conversation with you. And I would encourage you to go to the MAG website, check out the data that we have on this work through our homelessness team, as well as our data analytics that are available thanks to our regional analytics division at MAG. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy for any questions or feedback that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, so much for coming. Do we have any comments or questions at this time from the council? I'm going to wait on I'm going to have the presentations, and because I think we have some more presentations, correct? And then we'll go with the cards. Yes, Councilwoman.
I did just have one question for you. Earlier in your presentation, you had mentioned that many of them are actually working full-time jobs. I was wondering if you had the exact number in Arizona of how many are working full-time jobs but still homeless?
Right, absolutely. So I can give you one example. The area surrounding the Human Services Campus in downtown Phoenix is known as the Zone. 40% of the people who are living in the zone have jobs. And that statistic surprises people because it's, sometimes it's hard enough to get up and go to work, but even harder when you've been living in a tent in a situation that's really not ideal for folks.
So just to get a grasp on that, when you say have jobs, you mean full-time jobs for that 40%?
They have a range of employment. It's at least part-time, if not full-time.
Okay, and do you know what the number that correlates to that 40% is?
So in the zone, last time I heard, there were about 1,000 people, so it'd be 40% of that number have jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Very much.
I just was reading about Maricopa County getting $2 million in funding for homeless services, and they are directing some of that to a New Leaf, which is fairly close to here. It's only 12 miles or so, and they're for shelter. And then the community bridges, UMOM, a bunch of others. Would you, do you know about, I know we have continuum of care, but something that's more like a, we called, I think at one of our meetings, a one-stop shop where there's, and I think San Antonio has that sort of a model where, and you kind of touched on it with the child care, but they do resumes and haircuts and all kinds of things that it's not just, here's a place for you to stay for one night, but it's more of an overall area for services. Do we have anything like that in Phoenix or in our region?
Madam Mayor and members of the council, thank you very much for that question. The Human Services Campus is one example of that. That's where you have a number of different nonprofit agencies with different areas of expertise who are co-located in one area. And that model was designed so that we could treat people's needs in a very holistic and more effective way. Also, we'll find that there are smaller centers like that. So for example, there's one located within the city of Glendale. Often other nonprofits will offer they'll offer those services directly, or their case managers are able to refer out for those services. Case management is a really critical component of being able to offer those wraparound services. So we're moving more and more to that. And most often, if someone is providing any kind of housing, whether it's shelter or permanent housing, they're also providing those wraparound services.
So probably you would expect that might have a better success rate than when you were talking about how more is kind of coming in rather than going out, and going out in a way that's sort of a permanent solution or some success there. So would you think that, I mean, maybe they haven't been in existence enough to know if that would have a better outcome?
Madam Mayor and members of the council, absolutely. When people receive case management, they are more likely to be able to stabilize and to retain that stability.
And one last thing, so we have, there are different levels, and I know we're going to talk about different ordinances and such that have to do with law enforcement or code enforcement or those kind of things. Is there a contact that, so say somebody's not, they're not doing anything along those lines, but just to offer, and I know we have cards from a New Leaf and other things like that. Is there somebody even from MAG that would be a good contact? I know you are, but to say, and none of these situations are the same. So say somebody's here, they can't go to New Leaf because it's after hours or such. Is there something that might be available even no matter what time it is for us to get that kind of information that might be helpful? And maybe the law enforcement doesn't always have to be the one that is dealing with it. Maybe it's some other group or some other folks or organizations.
Absolutely. Madam Mayor and members of the council, there are a number of resources available, and sometimes, particularly with so many new people coming into the system, they don't know where to go. And so we're working really hard to make sure that people have access to the information 24/7. So for example, one tool that's available to you as a local government is called Hand Up. It's homelessness and needs data for unified planning. It's an interactive online tool. We'd be happy to provide that password to you. And with that tool, you can see where the need is in terms of people experiencing homelessness according to the outreach teams, but then also where are the resources that can be used to address the needs of people. And those resources cover a variety of different topics, everything from food boxes to medical care to legal assistance, clothing, employment assistance, mental health treatment, substance use treatment. So that resource is available to you. Also, being able to call or to go onto the website for 4211 Community Information Referral. They're a great resource, and they have information, again, across a whole variety of different kinds of needs. Also, if you ever did want to contact me, or and I can also put you in touch with our human services staff at MAG, we can help you to connect with the outreach team who's serving that particular area. Because the outreach teams, they can help to meet very immediate needs, but they can also, again, build up that relationship that's often so critical to people accepting services that will result in them obtaining housing.
Thank you very much. Before you go, I wanted to just touch on MAG a little bit. MAG is a metropolitan planning organization and the MPO for this region, and it's, I don't know, about 25 cities, towns, tribes, ADOT, other organizations that are part of it. And a metropolitan planning organization is federally mandated. That is the only way to get the federal funds that we get for, for these kind of programs. And I wanted to also mention that a typical council will address regional and municipal planning, economic, I wrote it down, community development, pollution control, transit administration, transportation planning, streets, human services, workforce development, and water use. They also play a huge role in regional hazard mitigation, emergency planning, and as you can see, with all of the information you have, collection, analysis, distribution of demographic and GIS data. You had a huge role in the census. And then just from a Fountain Hills point of view, we pay, I don't know, I think it might be $5,000 dues to join and to be part of this federally mandated organization. In the last 5 years, our public works and for various projects, we've taken in more than $8 million just for the town of Fountain Hills. So I just wanted to get a little bit of an overview, because sometimes we say these acronyms and people don't always know what MAG is or MPO is or anything like that. So, and again, I want to thank you very much for coming tonight. And if you can possibly stay, then I'm sure we might end up with some questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I just have a question. I was heard about the cooling centers. Where is the closest cooling center to Fountain Hills?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Skillicorn, and members of the council, I don't know offhand, but I'd be happy to get the information for you and follow up. If you go to our website, you can access the map, and that includes it as well, but I'd be happy to follow up with you directly.
And Madam Mayor, is it the same for the other, care items? You mentioned a little bit about some of our, helping create resumes, things like that. Where are these located in geographic terms to Fountain Hills?
One of them, at least the one that I was talking about, was New Leaf, and you know a lot about that, and that's just right at it's close. I don't know whether you can say where these places are, but that one is close. The other, it's not the bridges. There's one with the word bridge in it, though, that we can use that they can.
Community bridges, Mayor?
Yeah, I think that any time of day you can use that one. I think New Leaf, and New Leaf has other services also, but they do have hours. I know that Vice Mayor knows a lot more about that. And then we just got, and I know Captain Kratzer will be up here, and we have a good information sheet from MCSO about that, Alan. So maybe we can get more of that information and the actual locations to you, but they're in the proximity.
Madam Mayor and members of the council too, I'd be happy to provide the information for Hand Up, for that interactive tool, and then you can go into very specific geographies on the map, and you can see all of the resources that are right around you.
Very good, very good. That'll be helpful. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much. Rachel?
All right, that brings up our next presenter, which is Captain Kratzer. I want to, in advance, there was a lot of time and effort pulling data and putting together quite a bit of comparative analysis. So I know there's going to be a lot of graphs and a lot of information in this. So I want to encourage, if there's questions about it, what we're looking at and understanding it. This took a lot of time, so I expect it will be very very informational, but also it's a lot of information in and of itself. So in advance, thanks, Captain.
You're welcome. Let me get this open, and then I will. Rachel, I know you said you were going to spoon feed this to me. There's 2 PowerPoints open at the bottom, and neither of them are mine.
Madam Mayor, while he does that, I'm playing around on what I think is what Amy was referring to, the 2023 Heat Relief Network. If I understand this correctly, it looks like the library is considered a cooling center. And that's all we have in Fountain Hills. What's this little symbol? Anyway, the library is considered one in Fountain Hills.
Thank you.
It takes them, there it is.
I use this just.
Thank you, Captain. And again, I want to confirm what Rachel said, to thank you for putting all this information together for us.
You're welcome. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I first want to give credit where credit is due. Our criminal research analysis unit put this together for the town and for me at my request based on the upcoming conversation. So I can't say that I spent a lot of time behind the computer doing this because I don't really have the knowledge or ability to do that. And so with that being said, as we go through this presentation, if there are questions that are more technical in nature of where the data came from specifically, and I'm not able to provide the answer, I will definitely get that back to you after speaking to the analyst who created the crime report. So I want to start off by saying thank you for having MTSOs as part of the discussion. We are definitely a part of the issue and the topic here, and I just want to reiterate that, you know, we are a part, not the solution. And I know a lot of times there's some frustration when people call MTSO about an individual who might be homeless, who they think might be trespassing or loitering, and there are times where we are not able to take action due to a laundry list of things. But one of the big problems is some of the requirements in the law is that we have to have a victim, and that victim has to be willing to aid in the prosecution. So if someone's on private property, there's some hurdles there. That person, that business, that establishment, the property owner has to be willing to and want that person removed. So one of the things, some of our efforts that we did do, and when some of this discussion was coming up a year or two ago, was meet with a handful of the local businesses around town, some of the local churches, where we knew some of the problems were a little more persistent, and we discussed with them some of the things that they had the ability to do, that they could call MTSO if they had a subject there that they didn't want on property or that were bothering patrons. And we just ensured that they had the knowledge and understood what their rights were or what they could do, because I think some businesses or some people were not aware of what they could or couldn't do. So anyways, let's get into this. And some of this information is a little technical, so if there's some of the things in here we won't spend a lot of time on. But if there are questions, I'm happy to answer. So we're going to cover the Uniform Crime Report comparisons. And so Uniform Crime Reporting, that's an FBI program where police agencies share data of their crimes committed in their areas. And that's how this report was used to compare Fountain Hills to some of the other jurisdictions in the valley, because a lot of those jurisdictions, excuse me, a lot of those jurisdictions share crime report data on to the FBI. We'll talk about some policing activities and then some police contacts. So the first slide we have here, this is a 3-year look back of crime, 2020, 2021, and 2022. We're comparing Fountain Hills to Scottsdale. And what you'll see is population across the years for the Fountain Hills to the city that's being compared, so Scottsdale in this slide. And then you'll see violent crime. That's the first column after population. You'll see that violent crime is made up of homicide, sexual assaults, robbery, and aggravated assault. Per the Uniform Crime Reporting, that is what makes up violent crime. And then the next category is property crime, and that is made up of burglary, thefts, auto thefts, and arson. So again, you'll see the 3 years for Fountain Hills. You'll then see the 3 years for Scottsdale. You'll see the total number of incidents, homicides, sexual assaults, robbery, aggravated assault, so on. And then at the bottom, to make it more of a comparison of apples to apples, where it's not, when we're comparing Fountain Hills population of under 25,000 to a city like Scottsdale with a population of about 240,000, it's not easy to compare what that looks like unless you do some other form of analysis. So that's what our analyst did. She broke it down, thank you very much. She broke it down by rate per 1,000. So these crimes occurring per 1,000 residents, and that's the number you see there. So you'll see the 3-year breakdown again, and then you'll see the 3-year average in the yellowish column below. So looking at Scottsdale compared to Fountain Hills, you'll see that the homicide per 1,000 in Fountain Hills, fortunately we had 0 homicides in a 3-year period from 2020 to 2022, whereas Scottsdale had 17. When you look at that breakdown below, it looks a little bit, doesn't make a lot of sense because it's showing 0 for Scottsdale, 0 for Fountain Hills. Again, that's a rate, because of the mathematical equation and the way that works out. When you divide it, it goes to the hundredths mark, and you can't put a 1 there, so, or even a 10th spot. When you look at sexual assaults, you'll see Fountain Hills compared to Scottsdale, pretty much it's the same, being not broke down into its full decimal. Robberies, 0.1 in Fountain Hills compared to 0.3 Scottsdale. Aggravated assault, we look at 0.7 in Fountain Hills per 1,000 and 1.1 for Scottsdale. And then when we get to property crimes, total 12.1 in Fountain Hills compared to 21.3 in Scottsdale. And then your breakdown of burglaries, theft, auto theft, and arson, as you can see on the slide. The next one we look at, this is just a graph that makes it a little bit easier to visualize, comparing each of the crimes in the rate. You'll see, it's hard to see from the slide, but under homicide, even though it shows 0 for both, there is a tiny bit of shade under Scottsdale in the orange column for homicide, just to indicate it's not 1, but it's less than. So that just gives the visual. We're going to do the same now with Gilbert. Same exact model here. We look at the 3-year crime stat comparisons. We were quite a bit closer with Gilbert. And a lot of this talk came from some of the safe city discussion we have and the safe zip codes. And we're unable to do a comparison of safe cities, safe zip codes, other than this, the data collection. There are some private industries out there, real estate companies, who will do some level of analysis and come up with some sort of statements of, this is the safest zip code or the 3rd safest zip code. It's not something that law enforcement does. But comparing Fountain Hills to Gilbert, you could see where we compare against them in terms of looking at the bottom, reports per 1,000 people. Violent crime overall in the 3-year average is a 1.2 to a 1.2 to Gilbert. Same thing with homicides. We had 0, they had 17. Sexual assaults, we're at a 0.4, they're at a 0.3. Robbery, 0.1 equal. Aggravated assaults, we're slightly under them with a 0.7, they're a 0.8 per 1,000. Property crime, we're a little bit above Gilbert, 12.1 per 1,000 compared to 10.5. And then there's the breakdown associated with that. If there's any questions as we go, feel free. This isn't going to all be numbers like this. We'll start getting into a little bit of different topics. This is just giving a snapshot. Here's the graph that shows just the it's easier to visualize in this area. And then we did some additional analysis with some West Side agencies, cities. We didn't put those in here just for the sake of We have the data. If the council's interested in seeing that the raw numbers, this just kind of cuts it to the graph part where you can see the visualization there. So here's the comparison from Fountain Hills to Peoria on crimes per 1,000 people. You could see we're quite a bit lower in most categories than Peoria per 1,000. The same for Glendale. This is Glendale. You could see how Fountain Hills compares to Glendale in the uniform crime reporting stats. And then Anthem is an area that MCSO covers, so this incorporates, they're an unincorporated town, but this compares crime stats to them as well. And then we'll move to policing. Was there any questions on any of those? I know it was a lot real quick, but if there's any questions on that comparative data, I'd be happy to answer, or else I'll just continue on.
I just want to thank you because I know that we did talk about this, and there are, you know, those things you see online about, you know, they want people to move to the top safest communities or whatever in whatever states, and they are mostly, like you said, they're private. They're maybe even trying to get you to move somewhere or not move somewhere. So just wanted to tell you that I appreciate that, and also that, at least to me, it doesn't look like there's too much of, nothing really stood out with any of that except, you know, status quo.
Yeah, I agree. I think the 3-year crime stat picture of Fountain Hills, especially when you compare it to other cities and towns, places like Gilbert, Scottsdale. I know Fountain Hills is oftentimes compared to Scottsdale for, you know, a bunch of different reasons or categories. We felt like that would be an important one to kind of show what that picture looks like per 1,000. So
yeah, appreciate that.
Well, okay, we'll move into policing activities. This is just over the same 3-year period, calls for service versus deputy-initiated calls. So this is just a graph that shows in the green, you'll see the calls for service. So those are the calls that people actually initiate to our either 911 system or a non-emergency number. Year over year, not too much of a change in calls for service. And then the blue is the on-view activity by deputies. So that's during their downtime, the things that they're initiating themselves. You could see over the 3 years what those numbers look like. And, you know, it went from 7,132 events, dropped down to 6,660 in 2021. And then in 2022, last year, it went up to 7,508. The analyst says basically from that time frame, no significant increases occurred in calls, but there was an increase in initiated deputy activity. Then we move over to total reports by call for service. So the difference here is calls for service that we receive or that deputies initiate that result in a report. So we go on plenty of calls where there was no crime committed or there was no reason for a report to be generated. Our policy dictates what reports will be written, and basically it's any allegation of a crime being committed, we'll take a report, and deputies will sometimes err on the side of caution and take an informational report for other things. So the 3-year picture of that, you can see how the reports for calls for service it dropped by about 300 over 2021 compared to 2020 and a little under that for 2022. However, deputy-initiated activity, the reports for those calls increased. And those would be like if a deputy did a traffic stop and the driver had a suspended license or a warrant, then that would initiate a report on an on-view activity. Or if a deputy was driving through a business complex, saw a broken window, stopped and investigated, determined there was a burglary, that would then initiate a report.
I wanted to point out that, and we always have this conversation when we get our monthly reports about cases and such, that these that are deputy initiated actually reflect, you know, maybe a different, more stepped up one way or the other. So like we saw this huge, and I don't think you do reports for speeding tickets necessarily, but we did see like this huge jump in that, but that was a reflection of what we had asked to go out and be more active when it comes to that. So it's always hard to interpret when you see numbers go up, whether that's good because you're actually finding more and taking action on them rather than increased activity. It's almost like more of an outcome, of a good outcome.
That's a good point, because I just kind of assumed that people would have understood that it was, you know, initiated by requests for additional enforcement, or, you know, when we did the study and we saw the amount of downtime that was being reported deputies had and the push for, okay, you know, we've got to increase our downtime on view activity. So those are in direct correlation with that. I wouldn't necessarily say it was in correlation to increased crime or anything. I don't have the official breakdown to say that for certain, but it was definitely responsive to the requests of increased enforcement. Okay, moving on to, these are the top 10 report types. So these are calls for service that have resulted in a report. These are the top 10 calls that resulted in a report over a 3-year period combined. So our number one call for service that resulted in a report over the last 3 years is vehicle crash with no injuries. You see how high that kind of compares to everything else. Next, followed by criminal damage. You'll see that the criminal damage is in yellow, and then a couple of the other ones are in yellow. Those we'll delve into those just a little bit more because those ones had an increase over the 3-year period than the other ones did. Found property, theft, fraud or a con game, assault, identity theft, attempted suicide, traffic violation, and then burglary from vehicle. So it says a comparison of 2022's top 10 report types from previous years noted an increase in 2022 in the area of criminal damage, attempted suicide, and burglary from vehicle reports. So this is a criminal damage yearly report count. That was one we saw an increase over the 3 years. Criminal damage, you'll see that the peak of that was in July 2022 with 20 incidents. And then, so green is 2022, orange is 2021, blue is 2020. It might be hard for the audience to see that. One of the notes that the analyst made was criminal damage reports peaked in June and July of 2022. A review of these reports did not find a specific criminal pattern or trend. The event types were a mixed result of residential property damage, vehicle damage, graffiti, and political sign damage. However, across all years, graffiti and criminal damage calls were greatest in July of 2022. All right, we next move to a map of incidents of graffiti and criminal damage graffiti reports. So it broke it down more into graffiti calls. 29 reports from 2020 to 2022. The frequencies of these incidents appear nearest to parks, Four Peaks Park, businesses along East 7 and the Fountains. I think Rachel, as her time as the Park and Recs Director, can attest to the damage that occurs at the parks and the graffiti calls. Kevin as well. July peaks, possibly related to summer break, with students being out and kids being out. A lot of those graffiti damage things at the park tend to be done by juveniles. Then they break down the increase in the attempted suicide. So from 2020 to 2022, attempted suicide reports increased. So you can see that increase on the first column on the left there, green being 2020, blue being 2021, and then the orange being 2022. And we had 54 reports of attempted suicide compared to 33 and 34 the years prior. When you break it down to, so a suicide attempt is just that. It's not a successful, it's an attempt. It could be someone ingesting pills or other means, but then the actual suicides, you could see the increase there as well, 3, then 5, and then 8 in 2022. This next slide shows the total attempted suicide report on a graph. It says spring and holiday seasons have increased reports for attempted suicide. The good news is the current 2023 preliminary report shows a decrease in both suicide attempts and suicides. So we're on a trend where that's coming down for the year of 2023. Then it breaks down vehicle burglaries, and this shows kind of the hot spots. Burglary from vehicle reports did not have any significant changes by month in 2022. From 2020 through March 2021, or March 31st of 2023, burglary from vehicle reports were mapped. Frequency of the activities occurred most at business districts as well as apartments and along the main outlet roads. And that's consistent with what we know and see and try to share with the public. And then one of the notes the analyst made was that nationally catalytic converter thefts are still an ongoing problem, continue see an increase across the country. And then there's, on this one, it just shows the breakdown of how they're mapping that 1 to 3 incidents are in the smallest circle, 4 to 5, and then it goes up to 8 to 9, so it just shows you where those incidents are occurring at. What we're gonna move into now is probably more in line with the topic of conversation we're having tonight. This data, MCSO and as far as I know, no other agency in the Valley tracks crimes by transient or homeless individuals. It's just not something we do as an agency. It's not anything I'm aware of that other agencies do. The best we could do in trying to find some data that might correlate to crimes that might be more oftenly occurring by those who are homeless. The way our analyst was able to search this, she looked at the 3-year period, 2020 to 2022, just like the rest of the data. And she listed it as arrested persons who listed a residence. So we called them a resident, 94.6%, compared to arrested persons who listed no residence by 4.3. So what that's saying in a nutshell is that people who provided an address when they were arrested, this is the total arrest over 3 years where they were formally booked into jail or charged with a crime, whether it was through citation or a long form submittal. 94% of those people provided an address, and so we assume with that they were not transient, not homeless. 4.3% of the people who were arrested out of those total arrests didn't provide an address. Now, the disclaimer to that is that could be that the person decided just to not give the deputy an address, or it could be that they were transient or homeless. The data included anything in the report that did say transient and or no address provided or refused. And so, you know, we make some assumptions there. And it's not uncommon at times for someone to refuse to provide an address when they get arrested. They don't have to provide that. There might be some ramifications down the road in terms of being released by a judge on your own recognizance or your bond, but people do have the right to refuse that. So that's the closest we could come to an analysis. We're going to move to, this is going to be probably really challenging to see for the audience, but this breaks down the arrest over those 3-year periods, and it breaks it down by the address provided versus no address provided. And what you could see is the green are, when it's coded green over the years, so 2020, 2021, 2022, and then she did go into 2023 to current date, what percentage, so again, our percentage that we found in overall arrest for the 3 years was a 96% for those that had a residential address provided and only 4% for those that didn't. So we tried to see, was there any kind of correlation between crimes that were being committed by what you could say transient folks or homeless individuals. And you could see in the red, that's indicated by red. There were some crimes in here so warrant arrests in 2023, 27% of those arrests were by folks who didn't provide an address, whether that meant they were transient or not. 27% was the number for that year compared to what the norm was 4%. So there was an increase in that. Assaults in 2022, there was an increase compared to the norm of 4% up to 13. We saw criminal damage in 2022 be a little disproportionate to the number, and so on. So you could see, and then the ones that are in green, excessive speeding, those were 100% across the board throughout the 3 years plus 2023 of those who provided an address. So there was no 4% of individuals committing those crimes. And that happens in a couple of other areas, driving with the license suspended or revoked. It's close on drug violations for them being people, 3 out of the 4 years of people who have an address, so that you're presuming aren't transient. So this is just a breakdown, and you can delve into those a little bit more as you look across. And the threshold that she provided was there had to be more than 4 arrests in those 3-year periods for those crimes for it to be analyzed and be included in this. So there were some crimes that had less than that weren't included in the breakdown. And even 4 is pretty it's a small number, so it's hard to say. And you can see how small some of these numbers are where we provide a breakdown. I mean, we're talking 11 arrests on the warrant arrest, and there's some that are even fewer in there. So that, I don't know how helpful that is to this conversation, but it was the analysis we could provide that looked at overall crime data for 3 years, where we tried to give a breakdown of maybe some of those crimes that were being committed by folks that you could deduct from this that potentially may be homeless. So if there are questions on this, I'd be happy to take them. And then I would like after this to just bring up our behavioral health co-responder. It's a new program MCSO is doing. Taryn Minji is here tonight, and she's the head of that program. And she can just talk for just a couple minutes, and I think she could answer some of the questions that some of the council had, or even talk on some of the things that that program does and provides to deputies and the community, but also resources that deputies can use. So one of the things we always talk about is like homelessness alone is not a crime. So there's not anything that law enforcement can do if someone's just homeless. You know, we get calls that there's a homeless person, you know, on the sidewalk with a sign, and if they're not on private property and they're on public property, there's not much we can do. A lot of times we'll still go out and talk to those individuals if someone has a concern, or depending on what the call says. And there's times where they want resources, there are times where they don't want resources, and there's times where they don't even want contact from law enforcement. So those are all kind of the challenges we deal with when dealing. But I think when I'm done and you guys have the opportunity to answer some questions or ask some questions, I could bring Taryn up here and she might be able to just talk for a minute and introduce herself and answer a few more questions.
Thank you very much for the report. It's a lot of information, but given your knowledge about the homelessness in town, et cetera, you really can't pinpoint that homeless people are criminals or automatically look at them as criminals, et cetera, or that they're like a lot of criminal activity going on in town due to homelessness, right?
Yeah, I don't know that, I don't think I'm qualified to say that. I don't know that the data showed that's the case. I mean, again, it's the data that was collected and the way we were able to run it, not completely thorough and adequate, but with the way we were able to run it, we were looking to see if there was any trends for this conversation, you know, because of some of the talk and the discussion and belief that maybe there are some crimes that are occurring more frequently by that population. You know, we were trying to see if the data supported that or not. And I think in that 4-year picture, you know, it's 3.5 because this year's not fully over. That breakdown, I think, was kind of telling in that. And again, just so to be fair on the topic, there could be individuals who did commit some crimes that provided an address, and we wouldn't know whether they were homeless or not. So it's not a foolproof way of vetting out that system, but yeah, in the data and the way we were able to look at it and review it, that's not what jumps out at me.
Okay, thank you. Because if somebody's staying with a friend or a relative or something, for some reason they get arrested, they may not want to give that information out, et cetera. So it's not necessarily that they're homeless, but as you can see and take from your report, it's not an exact science. It's very complicated. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Councilwoman?
Do you currently have explanations for the increase? So while I understand that 4% back in the day also didn't necessarily include homeless people, but that increase from 4% to 27% is a lot.
So
you had mentioned earlier when we were looking at that larger graph, so that slide right there.
Yes.
You had mentioned that the previous number of no address provided compared to the new number was a 27% as opposed to 4%.
Councilwoman Toth, well, I think I succeeded at thoroughly confusing probably a lot of people. I was specifically talking about in the year 2023, where it's talking about warrant arrest. The standard, what we found in total arrest was 96% of arrests, total arrests for that whole 3-year period. That was the 96% were by those who provided an address, 4% were those who didn't provide an address or were listed as transient. In this one specifically, warrant arrests for 2023, year to date, of all warrant arrests, 27% of those arrests have been by folks who don't have an address. So is that what you're speaking to?
Yes, and let me actually clarify that question. So if you have a warrant, but they didn't provide an address once arrested, how did you find them in the first place?
Well, that could be for, I mean, if we get a call for service and we go and we have contact with an individual, we run that individual to see if they have a warrant. If they come back with a valid arrest warrant, then we take them down and book them. We then have to provide all of that information in the new booking, their name, their date of birth, any address that they're willing to list. So that would be new information provided during that arrest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So the increase that I originally asked about, in 2022, we have 95.2% versus 4.8%.
Okay.
In 2023, we have 72.7% versus 27.3%. That 4.8 to 27.3 in 1 year's time seems like quite the increase.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to speak to that just because of all the nuances that are in the data in terms of us MCSO not collecting tracking data for homeless versus transient versus non-transient individuals with all the flawed data. I mean, this is just a snapshot. I can't explain that increase. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if truly there are more individuals out there who are currently homeless who have more warrants than the year before, or if it's some of the other nuances where the person's like, well, I'm not going to give you my address. Or one of the other things that when we talked about this, one of the things I'd written down was if a deputy failed to put that in the booking paperwork, the address for a person, that probably wouldn't happen in 2023 because we've corrected those issues where deputies maybe failed to put down a listed address. So it probably wouldn't be what would happen in 2023. Now, if you're looking back at 2020, that's possible where quality control maybe wasn't as focused on. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Captain. If you don't mind, I have one other question. Captain, as you know, we are here today to figure out a possible update to our town ordinances. Something you mentioned in the very beginning of your presentation was that a lot of times there's not necessarily a victim, in which case, in some cases, is because the town doesn't have an ordinance that would allow you to act. Specifically speaking, what are some things that maybe you've seen in other communities or ideas that you've come up with that you would suggest to empower you to be able to act more often? And I understand that still wouldn't affect when private property is the case.
Councilmember Toth, we've talked to some other local law enforcement agencies about, how they're addressing some of the homelessness issues and enforcement within the communities. And I know Aaron has talked about an aggressive panhandler ordinance that I think Glendale has. I can't remember what city has that. But I mean, it depends on the verbiage that is put in the ordinance and what the ordinance addresses. There's plenty of laws right now that we utilize when dealing with certain crimes like littering, loitering, criminal trespass. There's a town ordinance for criminal trespass. Most deputies usually use the state revised statute for criminal trespass. But we have those tools there. I don't know of specific ordinances. We haven't had a lot of conversation yet about what an ordinance might look like by the town if they were to create one. Are we talking about panhandling? Are we talking about, I don't know of a ordinance or a law you could pass that just says someone, that deals with homeless individuals. I don't know what that might look like in terms of outside of the typical violations you might have of someone being on property that they shouldn't be on or don't have permission to be on, someone littering or loitering. I think in the past we talked about individuals being in the median with signs panhandling and whether or not the town could adopt an ordinance that would allow us to not let them be in that median, and if they are, then we can move them along. But there's plenty of case law on public property where I don't know that the town has the ability to prevent folks from being on public property and public places.
I think Aaron might have something to say.
And I'll try not to step on Aaron's toes too much, but we enforce the ordinances. We don't come up with the ordinances. So now we can assist in that process if asked. But we don't sit back and write the ordinance and say, hey, pass this so we can go enforce it. If that's decided by the town and it's determined to be applicable and constitutional by the agency and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, will enforce that ordinance for the town.
Thank you, Captain.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilwoman. To your question, I think Captain Kratzer said it right. You're not going to find in any other municipality an ordinance that deals with homelessness specifically, and that's kind of because of what Captain Kratzer said at the beginning, that status crimes, like the regulating someone based on their sheltered or unsheltered status, don't exist in the United States. What you'll typically see in the vast majority of cities and towns, including here, are ordinances that apply sort of neutrally to all individuals, but that maybe crimes or maybe civil citations that you commonly find in the unsheltered context, like, for example, obstructing the right-of-way or overnight camping prohibitions within the right-of-way or on public property. You might find loitering ordinance, you might find public urination ordinances, those types of things that, whether citable under state or local law, do typically bleed into the homelessness space. So when we're looking at those kind of ordinances, there won't be and cannot be anything that specifically says homelessness is not allowed in this space, because that's not how we regulate homelessness in the US. We regulate it based on a person's conduct as opposed to their status of existing. So I don't know if that was helpful as a follow-up.
Right, thank you, Aaron. Just to clarify, I mean, in cases where there's a call and there's an issue, if we can explore ways to ensure that that conduct is being properly
Yes. And if I can add, well, and Larry, you're certainly, Captain Kratzer, you're certainly able to respond to that as well, of course. This is something that we hear, and I'm sure MCSO hears across the board, of the tools all being there, but sometimes the difficulty being, once MCSO or once the law enforcement agency responds, who's there and who was a witness to it, and is the person even still on site and present, and is someone willing to serve as a complainant? You know what I mean? So you do deal with those enforcement issues on the back end, and that is not unique to Fountain Hills. That's going to be universal throughout whatever community you're in. It's a challenge, but we can work on those ordinances that get us to a spot where it gives us greater tools to respond. Whether we can actually get all the pieces to line up at the end of the day is a different story, but we can work toward that end. Yeah.
And Councilmember Tilt, if you don't mind me responding, I think that a lot of times when we go to calls where we are dealing with homeless individuals and someone is called, whether it's a criminal trespass or littering, some of the challenges we have are kind of what Aaron talked about, having someone who has standing on that property who doesn't want that person there, or it being private property. We had a recent incident where there was a subject in a wash. We got a call, deputies went out, they talked to the subject. Deputies are aware of the town ordinance about the use of the town washes. We have a map now from Justin Weldy with the town, and that's almost like a mathematical equation trying to figure out which washes are privately owned, which washes are town-owned. And we did cite that individual for being in the town wash, only to find out that he was on a private wash, and we had to go back and rescind that citation because we had that wrong. And so those are just some of the challenges. And in basically what I'm getting to is, I don't know of an ordinance, I don't know of a situation we've ran into where if there was an ordinance that was written in a certain way, it would have given us the ability to charge that person with something because the state law wasn't comprehensive enough, or there wasn't something that was there in our tool bag that allowed us to take a different approach. Specifically, I can't think of a scenario that would happen with, other than maybe if there was something that was passable for the median, someone being in the median and blocking that. Because we do have, if someone's going into the roadway, stopping cars and getting money, we could enforce that. There's a state law for that. The number of times that's happened, we've had reports of that, but actually getting there, having the person say, hey, I've seen them, we talked to the person, they said, yeah, I did stop traffic and I did go. I mean, that's the perfect scenario that really never happens unless a deputy witnesses it. So just all those points. And then just in this conversation, bringing the court into it and the town prosecutor, because they do have some challenges as well. And that's not to say we wouldn't look at, or the town shouldn't look at passing an ordinance that the council gives them direction to. But they have to be on board, especially for a town ordinance, and the prosecutor being on board to say, okay, MCSO is good at enforcing this. We are good at charging this or going to trial on it if we need to, with all of those parties involved, and I know that this discussion is getting to the point to see if there's any ordinances that the town can pass or desires to pass that is then workable for everyone and makes sense, so.
Thank you. I wanted to jump in on the numbers thing, and then I think Ms. St. Peters had something to add. The 27% such, that's 3 people. So it's what kind of this chart has percentages, but then it has actual instances. So it's not the easiest thing to follow because, you could have 1 warrant 1 year and 2 the next year, and it's a 100% jump. So I think we have to keep that in mind. There's 11 total warrants, and 3 of them were people that didn't give their address. So not only do we not know, does that mean that they're transient, but it's 3 people. So I don't think we need to overreact, or I don't mean that you did, but all of these percentages are a little bit difficult when you look one over at the number. So you got 100% are, well, with an address provided. Okay, so that drug violation, 100%, but it's 1 person. So I think when we're dealing with Fountain Hills and the number of actual incidences, then they get skewed, almost like the roads did, by using percentages. So we almost have 2 different ways of measuring here in one chart. Also, if you look down, there's a lot of black, and so that doesn't, so it's a little bit hard to know what that means. There's some red, there's some green, but there's a lot of black. So on the top, like say, for example, a drug violation, 100%, aggravated assault, 100% in black, 2 people, but that should be in green, I think. So I think that maybe this particular chart we could do some more analysis of it, but I don't want to overreact to what this chart is saying percentage-wise. Same goes with all those zeros. If you add all those zeros up, you're not going to get that 8.7% number there at the bottom. So this is the kind of thing that what we're trying to do is not easy to do, which is drill down on what we're reading, what we're hearing, and say, no, this is the reality. There's 1 incident or 2 incidents, and I think we have to try and figure that out in a way that is exact, and we can't. I wanted to ask Amy to come up because she had given me, I think it had to do with what Hannah had asked about, and then go ahead after that, Jerry.
Mayor and Council, thank you very much for the opportunity. I was going to point out too, and it's tough with looking at the data to look at big percentage increases, but then it's going from 1 person to 3 people. So yes, it's important to really dive a little bit more deeply into those numbers. Did also want to comment though, we've had some really good and seen some really, really good progress being made with law enforcement, particularly when they're paired with nonprofit agencies. Because for law enforcement, they weren't hired to be social workers, right? They're here to keep us safe, and they do a very, very good job of doing just that. And so sometimes they're often the first point of contact with someone experiencing homelessness, which means that that's our first opportunity maybe to engage with them and to bring them into really life-changing services and housing. But that doesn't mean that they have to be social workers in that process. And so we've seen some really good successes when we're pairing law enforcement, say with Community Bridges. We had talked about them before. It's a nonprofit. They have great services. They also have peer support, so it's people who have experienced homelessness themselves, and then they're employed to help other people experiencing homelessness. They can kind of speak their language, they can relate to them, they're very approachable, and they're very, very good at building that trust and building that rapport. And so Community Bridges is just one agency, it's one option. Phoenix Rescue Mission also has very, very good outreach teams. But when we compare law enforcement with nonprofit agencies who specialize and who are the social workers, then law enforcement can do what they need to be doing, and the nonprofits can step in with that expertise, and they provide that connection. And so that's a really, really good strategy. Another strategy that we're seeing too, more so on kind of that carrot and stick, is that sometimes when people experiencing homelessness have been charged with an offense, we have a regional community court system. And so, again, sometimes it can be tough to get people to engage in services. And so the community court can say, well, if you enter this, say, treatment program, or if you enter this shelter, then we'll drop these other charges. And it's kind of that extra leverage sometimes that's needed, and that's very useful in getting people to engage, and also in helping them too, because the social service system is much more cost effective. It is much more affordable than the criminal justice system for very good and valid reasons. We have to invest in public safety. But it gives us another avenue, another option to be able to work with people that isn't always available otherwise. And so we do have that regional community court system. Some communities have partnered with neighboring communities to set up a community court just for their participating communities. So there are a number of different options for that. As part of Pathways Home, our regional homelessness action plan for local and tribal governments, we did develop a toolkit for communities who are interested in that community court model. And we'd be happy to help provide any technical assistance around that. We find that often training is really critical to helping people to fully leverage all available options that could be at their disposal. And so any help that we can provide in connecting you with those resources and those training opportunities, we'd be happy to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Jerry.
A couple of points on your information, Larry. One, Fountain Hills doesn't really compare with Scottsdale and Gilbert. And two, a lot of these categories don't apply to a homeless person, like auto issues and traffic violations, traffic citations, speeding, that kind of thing. So we could probably drill that down a lot more. But I do have a question. And this is dealing with performance metrics from these agencies that we help support. Do you know, have we had any social worker from New Leaf or from Community Bridges or MAG come out and actually talk to the people that are in our town?
Councilmember Friedel, I understand your points on some of the statistics there, and that is the challenge with kind of coming up with some statistical comparisons to other towns. There's not a lot of towns that we can run comparable, data to say, okay, well, this town also has 24,000 people and looks like Fountain Hills, or has the same dynamics. So that was probably the best crack at trying to find something that made sense. In terms of Community Bridges or some of the other nonprofits coming out, they haven't come out that I know of and rode with us or met with people. I do know, and I think this will lead perfectly into Taryn coming up and just talking briefly. I know I don't want to take up too much time on the agenda with the other topics that need to be talked about. But we have taken individuals to Community Bridges. We have taken, I don't know that we've taken anyone yet since the town has partnered or with New Leaf. We've talked about some challenges with that are, different things, but Taryn and our co-responder, our behavioral health co-responder program, since that's come on board, I want to say in around April, she could correct me if I'm wrong when she comes up. She's already outlined a bunch of resources, additional ones that we have, and I don't know that they're the direct ones that the town has partnered with or, pays money to. I don't know how that works. But there are resources available to us that a lot of deputies didn't know, that I didn't know, that we can now call her in that program, and they'll help us when we're out with somebody find resources. So I do know we have taken people to Community Bridges. New Leaf, not so much. We visited New Leaf. My two lieutenants went there to see how that program could help with potential homeless issue in town, and they met with some of the staff and sat down with them for a while, and they learned a lot about what they could offer, some of the hurdles in bringing someone there, or dropping them off, whether it was or wasn't an option. So,
and then I have two other questions. This might be for staff. Do we have a littering fine or ordinance right now? And what I'm thinking about is Denny's, Wells Fargo, and the medical center are three areas where there's an awful lot of littering, because you brought that up. I don't know if we've addressed that now. That's probably private property, but do we fine those businesses for that stuff sitting there? It's an eyesore to the town, and it doesn't look good at all. And then the other question that I had is, does our current ordinance address camping in our parks?
With respect to littering, we do have a litter ordinance in place. It's certainly no property owner can maintain a property in a condition that causes a nuisance, which is what we're looking at. So yes, those are on the books and those are readily enforceable. Councilman, your second question, I apologize, was, camping, sleeping in parks.
in our parks.
Yes, we do have that prohibition on the books in chapter, I believe, 9 of our code.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, we'll have her come up, and then we'll ask for...
Madam Mayor?
Oh, yes. Alan?
Yes.
Yes, Councilman?
Madam Mayor? There we go. Yeah, I just had a question. Both the captain and our attorney might be able to comment on this. I've been asking him email last couple days about that situation where we have a town-owned park that's leased out. It sounds like, as of yesterday, the attorney was saying that is enforceable for the town. But I still think there's a little bit of confusion there. What is the answer to that question? Can we enforce that, or do we need the complainant to be the...
Got it. Aaron's going to answer.
Mayor and Councilman, I remember your question. And for a little bit of elaboration, the question had to do with a property that's town-owned property that's leased to Kiwanis. Rachel, is that correct? Okay. So the answer that I gave yesterday was under the assumption that it was a town park, and I've since been corrected by the interim town manager that it's not a park. So we're not dealing with prohibitions on overnight camping or sleeping in a park. Regardless, to the extent an individual is on the property that's that's leased by a private organization, we would need the individual to actually complain about that. That's the type of situation where if someone's trespassing on property that they're leasing, and they want to remove that individual from the property, we need Kiwanis to do that. So I think that's the answer to the question. Rachel, do you have anything to add, or Captain Kratzer, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Aaron. I did see the emails. I did respond to some level. We view it as though it would be no different than a residence that someone owns and is leasing out or renting out to someone. That person the homeowner would not be able to say, I don't like who that tenant is bringing by. I want to trespass that person. It would be the person who is renting the home from them who would have to make the decision that they didn't want this person on their property. So that's how we viewed it, and in some of the conversation through email, that's what I took from it, and that was the last response. And Councilman Skelecorn, I do see how that was confusing, because it was a little confusing for us as well. But I think in the end, it sounds like we've got some clear understanding of that, and maybe I'll let the town manager decide how to communicate that back to you, but I think we have an answer now.
And Madam Mayor, as a follow-up, can we amend the lease to include an anti-camping provision?
The council member, the mayor, actually stepped out for a second, but in response to your question, I'll go ahead and look at that lease and see what it says. I don't have the lease handy in front of me. But can you amend a lease to say that you will prohibit camping? Not that I'm independently aware of. I mean, I'm thinking about if I lease a property and decide to allow somebody, whether it's me or a family member or somebody, to stay on the property. I mean, unless they agreed to that in the terms of the lease, then sure, but that would be really uncommon.
Madam Mayor, in regards to the particular property in question, by default, I'm the town's landlord, and I have read the lease in great detail. I have also reached out to the leasee's representative, which is Sunset Kiwanis, and I have left him a voicemail and asked that he contact me so we can discuss this in more depth. I will certainly report back to the town manager the results of that meeting after it takes place.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Alan?
I think I'll wait for the attorney's presentation for any questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we're ready.
All right.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Taryn. Thank you so much, Council, for having me, and for Captain Kratzer for bringing me over. So I can speak a little bit about what MCSO is doing to kind of work towards meeting the members of your town, about how if they're in crisis, we're working on getting them connected to resources. So I am a licensed professional counselor. I've been working with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the jails, and now on the patrol side. So we're working on getting deputies up to speed on what local resources are available to them when they're encountering individuals in crisis, with the goal of diverting people into mental health care, into substance use care, into housing services rather than incarceration. So what my role is to be kind of the expert in the field so that I can connect the deputies when, say, they encounter someone that is experiencing homelessness, what shelters are available, what's that process like, what are even though there are a lot of challenges with getting someone into housing, we want to be able to meet those requirements where they're at. So say someone's in crisis and they need mental health care, their deputies have lists of all the inpatient facilities that are available to them. They have lists of all the homeless shelters that are available in Maricopa County. And we've also developed resources for local to Fountain Hills for District 7 so that they know what food banks, what homeless shelters, what psychiatric emergency centers are available. So I think you guys have copies of those. So basically, deputies also have access to a resource line so they can call and receive consultation about any crisis that they're experiencing with members. And this is the goal, is that to incorporate more of that mental health care and more of a trauma-informed approach when interacting with members of the public. So as Amy was saying, law enforcement is often encountering people in crisis, but we are looking at incorporating for all of MCSO ways to connect people to services rather than incarcerate. Mm-hmm.
Any questions? Comments? No? So why don't we go to the cards? Thank you so much. There may be more questions coming.
Okay, first we'll do the one written comment. It's at your station, and Diane E. Price is against it, but you probably should read her comment and what she means by that. And then we have our in-person comments. We have 4 speaker cards. The first up is Crystal Kavanaugh, and on deck is Liz Gildersleeve.
Well, let me just start by saying I'm going to be a little less warm and fuzzy with my words. And I think we have a quality life here, and I'd like to just keep it that way. So I'm thinking a tight ordinance with consequences is needed to prevent Fountain Hills from having zones with littering, loitering, and panhandling. If we actually designated littering as a crime, because I'm not really sure what it's designated as now, like some cities have, it could be useful. A stiff penalty of $500 for the first offense, a second offense perhaps $2,000, or even 180 days in jail. Now this might actually solve a few other problems. Whether you like it or not, being incarcerated can achieve effective rehabilitation results from addiction, even if just for a while. The person's no longer homeless, he gets meals, a place to sleep, and hopefully restricted from drugs. In those 6 months, services can be set up to help the individual back on track. Just something to think about. In some locations, businesses and all private property owners get fined if they don't turn in the litter bugs on their property, or if they don't clean it up themselves. Sounds harsh, right? But does it help to right this ship? As noted by many in Fountain Hills, the homeless issue definitely creates litter. Citizens can turn in the litter bugs. This provides a pathway to getting law enforcement involved. Same with loitering. Stiff fines for loitering are needed, and businesses must discourage it too. If it is against the law, then law enforcement can be involved, and businesses have a place to turn. Right now, I think some businesses feel they have no options. Stiff panhandling fines should be implemented for violations if that person does not have a business permit to operate. Not $50 permits either. How about $250 permits to panhandle in Fountain Hills? Violators can then be given $500 fines for panhandling without a permit. Even though the U.S. Supreme Court previously ruled that panhandling is protected under free speech and it can't be outlawed outright, local municipalities should be able to set up their own ordinance listing specific guidelines, not being on medians for safety concerns, or on sidewalks, or too close to the curb near traffic, or within so many feet from specific locations. Those hanging out on the streets may need to be transported to existing services elsewhere for drug abuse or mental health issues. Fountain Hills, like we said, already contributes financially to some of these programs. Or some on the streets are actually fully capable humans that panhandle instead of going to work each day, because it can be pretty lucrative in some areas and tax-free. So next time, any people around here who feel like being compassionate, just don't do it. The cash you give that individual may go to buy a bottle of booze, cigarettes, lottery tickets, or drugs. Or consider you may be getting scammed by an able-bodied person using sad signs, children, or pets. But you get to feel better about yourself for being a giver. Either way,
your time's up.
A tight ordinance will help Fountain Hills. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Liz Gildersleeve, Fountain Hills resident. Thank you, all of you, for addressing Fountain Hills' need for a stronger ordinance tonight. My questions and comments center mostly, though, around a new leaf. Our town has done some promotion regarding a new leaf, to which Fountain Hills taxpayers have extended financial support of around $50,000. But it should be noted that there are many other agencies that also deal with homelessness, addiction counseling, job training, and housing. Agencies like CAS, East Valley Men's Shelter, Phoenix Rescue Mention, Thrive, Homeless Haven, Phoenix Dream Center, and UMOM, not to mention churches like St. Mary's and St. Vincent de Paul, as well as countless governmental departments and agencies whose sole focus is supposed to be to help guide the vulnerable. So how is it that we have a new leaf? Who chose a new leaf for Fountain Hills? Because a new leaf appears to be forming a quasi-partnership with Fountain Hills, I'm curious as to how the vulnerable in Fountain Hills needing their services find out about them. Do counselors from a new leaf proactively make contact with some of the individuals we see regularly at Shea and Swaro, outside the Safeway, outside the Target, under picnic ramadas at the parks, even the makeshift homeless encampment behind the middle school that occasionally pops up? Are they offered transport to the Mesa facility? How is a new leaf being held accountable for the taxpayer dollars that they've received from Fountain Hills? I do believe that a strong ordinance based on conduct is necessary and certainly not heartless. In fact, a strong ordinance would benefit the vulnerable as much as it would benefit residents and business owners. People experiencing crisis should be made aware of the many services, and I'm actually quite pleased tonight to learn from Captain Kratzer that there's the woman, the behavioral health woman who does now assist MCSO. It appears, however, that a new leaf is the answer. I'm guessing simply because we've provided financial support to them. However, if they choose not to avail, if anyone in crisis chooses to not avail themselves of services, they should not be enabled by being allowed to aggressively panhandle or erect makeshift housing. That is, in fact, the pressure point where I see this new ordinance or ordinances as being proactive and a necessary tool to protect the town. Thank you.
Next, we have Barry Wolborski, and on deck, Kim Wolborski.
I've got to go home.
Your card was submitted first.
I'm Barry Wolborski. I live here in Fountain Hills. And I just wanted to talk for 40 years, I was a psychologist, licensed psychologist, PhD from the University of Washington, and my specialty was chemical dependency. And I noticed when that chart was presented up there that less than 21% of those people were addicts and alcoholics. And I think that's really wonderful because that's about the same percentage in the population, so I guess no more than that, huh? I would like to talk about statistics a little bit because I spent 2 years at the university teaching statistics. I would like to be your statistical evangelist if I could, because I think that the town of Fountain Hills is the statistical antichrist. Number one, thank you, Mayor, for pointing out that the difference was 3 people. Small number statistics are meaningless, okay? They mean nothing. They're just random events. Number two, the work that was done to determine that those less than 21% were alcoholics and addicts was self-report. This city loves to do self-report surveys. They're meaningless. There are psychometric tests that can be given to tell whether somebody's an alcoholic or an addict or not. They're pretty reliable in the high 90%. Self-report is pretty unreliable. Somebody comes up to somebody on the street that's, loaded out of their minds and say, "Are you an addict?" No, of course not. They're not going to admit that. I would like to know how they got the numbers on how many of those people were employed. Was that self-report also? Self-report statistics are meaningless, okay? What I see is people crafting things to make things look a certain way with statistics. There was a prime minister of England named Benjamin Disraeli, and some of you might know what I'm going to say. He stood before the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and he said there's 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. We're getting a lot of statistics here to try to prove a point, but are meaningless. That's all I've got to say.
Hello, Madam Mayor, Council, and Linda, and everyone else. I'm Kim Wolborski, and I'm a resident of Fountain Hills, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I love this town. I'm so glad to have been welcomed here. I have also take issue with Ms. St. Peter's statistics on the number of alcoholics that are in the homeless population. One of the main, I have personal experience in my family with alcoholism and mental illness. I live a very comfortable, happy life now. I have a lot of information. I got a lot of information about that. I personally don't live in that disease, but I know I have seen it. I have experience with it. I have experience with not being wealthy. And I know what it's like to, be on the edge of homelessness. It's not pretty, and I would like to commend you for the work that you're doing with the elderly and with single parents. I think that's important. I think some people do become homeless because of issues with medical and that kind of thing. But one of the main symptoms of alcoholism, both in the alcoholic and in the family, is denial. People don't think that they're alcoholics. They don't think that's the problem. They could be at death's door. They could be losing their liver, and they don't think they're that bad. They think it's all these other things that were listed on the list. And I think, so the words that came to mind were, well-meaning and enabling. And I think in Fountain Hills, we have to be really careful not to be enabling people who are addicts and alcoholics. My husband is a specialist in this field. He has 2 things he says that I love, well, don't love, but I think are very accurate. He talks about people enabling people into the grave, parents enabling their children into the grave. He also says, how do you know that an addict is lying? His lips are moving. So that's all I have. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for public
Thanks.
comment.
So further discussion with council, or staff or anything to add? No? I think,
Madam Mayor,
yes, Councilman, go ahead.
did the attorney have some sample language for us to consider passing?
We do. I would be not here tonight. I know that based on the council's discussion and some of the input we've received from the public, I think what we can do is take some of what's been done in some of our other municipalities, even one where MCSO is the law enforcement agency, and try to bring back a number of potential options for the council to adopt. Some of those may include prohibitions on blocking or loitering right-of-way. They may include expanding areas within which tents and structures can be located. There may be another couple of options that are included there, and I think that will help the council to have a little bit of a firmer grasp on the types of ordinances we're dealing with, but that's what you'd be seeing coming back to you.
Madam Mayor, may I ask the attorney, in some emails that went out to the council about both the Queen Creek ordinance and the Glendale ordinance.
I'm
what are the differences between those?
Sorry, go ahead and finish. I don't want to intrude on anything that's privileged. That's my only caution.
Well, I'm curious of what the difference is between the Queen Creek and Glendale ordinances.
You mean the Queen Creek and Glendale ordinances that both regulate aggressive panhandling? Are those the two ordinances you're referring to, council member?
Yes, that is correct.
Sure. So Mayor and council member, I'm happy to pull them both up, but the ordinances are fairly similar in nature to my recollection. They both prohibit panhandling and try to regulate aggressive panhandling within certain locations, at bus stops, within a certain number of feet of ATMs. There are a number of other locations where they do that. Glendale's was a little bit more aggressive in that it was adopted around Super Bowl time, so I think they drew a bigger zone around, the stadium and other areas in their downtown entertainment district. So that's probably the primary difference. Otherwise, they draw on the same language.
Madam Mayor, if I just might want to comment on this, I thank you for bringing in speakers, very informative. But I just have to say, and I think this is what the people of our town are trying to say, is that these soft on crime policies, like Portland and Seattle, Phoenix, California just have not worked. Taxpayers have spent millions and millions and probably millions more, and these issues have only gotten worse. The money we spent has not made things better. And with all this money that we spent, we could have bought homes for these people. A moment ago, I said that these policies haven't worked. No, I misspoke. These soft on crime policies have been a colossal failure. If we had a house fire, the first thing we would do is put it out. Then we would research why. And today, we need to put out this fire. So I have two motions that I want to make. The first one is going to be an ordinance banning standing in one place or sitting on the median. Actually, I should restate that. Ban on standing in one place or sitting on any median for any road with a speed limit higher of 35 miles an hour or higher.
So we're, Alan, we're not. You can make that for future consideration, but this isn't an action item tonight. So.
Well, Madam Mayor, this is on the agenda. It is agendized. I believe it is completely in order to make a motion to propose a specific language for an ordinance.
Okay, hold on a second. Aaron?
Yeah, so Mayor and council member, it's not agendized for action. That said, the whole idea is to take direction from the council, not in a formal motion fashion. So if there's a collective direction from the council to pursue those types of ordinances, which would be included in that list of what I discussed earlier, we're happy to bring that forward.
So kind of a point of order here is that council has specifically changed rules so items like this would be put on the agenda. And, you know, this motion was made months ago. Why wouldn't this be an actual action order? It actually seems like this is a violation of council rules to have it as something that we cannot make a motion and actually pass an ordinance on.
Well, we often have items that we don't take action on, but if you want to make a motion and Aaron says it's okay that you do, then it's okay with me.
Yeah.
I mean, it says suggested motion here, motion to direct staff to take steps. So
Oh, okay.
if you want
If
to
it has
direct
language for suggested
staff-
motion, great. Let me scroll down and find it. Move to direct staff to take appropriate steps as identified. Good, okay. I was, sorry, I thought this was, it was just discussion only. If we want to move to direct staff to do X, Y, and Z, it's agendized that way, that's great.
Yeah, so
Well, Madam
would you
Mayor,
restate?
I would love to. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to make a motion to direct staff to draft an ordinance. Actually, two ordinances. The first one would ban standing in one place or sitting on any medium for any road with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or higher. That would be my first motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second that says that no person at all, whatever their status, cannot be on the median of a street that has a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, and they can't be on the curb. Was that correct?
Madam Mayor, I think the intent of this is that someone is not loitering in one place. So if a town employee was, doing landscaping or a contractor or something, that's fine. They're doing something that they need to be there for. But if someone is literally just loitering on a median on a higher speed road, that would be a safety hazard. That's a different situation. And, if they're not supposed to be doing something there, they could definitely be a safety issue. And that's what this would be, the intent would be.
So Saguaro Boulevard is a 35-mile, and we have one crosswalk that's not in an intersection. So whatever we decide to pass applies to every single person. So
Madam Mayor, in response to that, I think the intent is not someone that is going across a crosswalk, but again, someone that is stationary or sitting. If someone is taking the crosswalk and then waiting for a car, I don't think that would be considered loitering, and that wouldn't be the intent of what I'm asking for either.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
It sounds to me like you're trying to target homeless people. I think that while I appreciate what you're saying, it's so broad, I don't even know how it would be enforceable. I just don't think it would be enforceable. It's way too broad. How can you even put that in an ordinance? Aaron?
Mayor and council member, don't know. Let's direct staff to do what we need to do, and we'll bring something back, see what happens.
So my understanding of the motion is for someone loitering in a median for an extended period of time, not just trying to cross the street or something. And the reason that I seconded this motion is because this is a safety issue I've actually brought up in the past in meetings with Rachel or with Grady before her. This is a safety issue. If we have individuals that are loitering in the median, there's a very high potential for them to be interfering with traffic, and that could be injury to them. That could be opening up to collisions. That is something that I have spoken about in the past, and I think is a valid concern. This isn't something that's attacking someone based off status. In some ways, it's actually looking out for their safety as well.
I feel like this deserves more thought. So I'm trying to place myself in those situations where I would be standing on the median or what have you. A lot of conversation happens when you're walking down the street, down the sidewalk. What happens on parade day? What happens, the developer can't put a sign out on the side of Shea, so he usually hires somebody to stand and spin the sign or whatever. So I understand the concept, but I'm a little concerned that this is so blatant against one particular kind of person that I don't like something that is not, it's too subjective. Oh, no, we won't worry about the sign guy because he's holding the sign and he's helping our developer make money. How is, I have a problem with that. I just see issues. I mean, I'm gonna have to rely on Aaron for that.
Well, I think that's you raise a decent point. We have to make it facially neutral and apply it neutrally, and that's the best we can do with that type of an ordinance, right? That's the best answer that I could give right now.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Although I find myself with some agreement with time, place, and manner restrictions, I think that the ordinance that Alan's proposing doesn't pass constitutional muster. I think we have to protect our town, first and foremost, from lawsuits. There's a gentleman that is in our town right now, and he has very offensive signs that he holds up, and he goes all over the town. I think we're all familiar with people that live here. He may be the smartest person in Fountain Hills because I think he's trolling, okay, for an illegal arrest where he'll be richer than Bart Shea eventually. We have to watch out for that. I've done a great deal of legal research on what we're discussing tonight, and we have to proceed with great caution. And I don't think that coming up with an ordinance in a quick fashion that hasn't been really reasoned out with our legal team is not going to bode well for us. So I would not be for this ordinance tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. This will be my last comment on the topic. First of all, once again, this is a safety concern. I wholeheartedly disagree with the comments of my fellow councilwoman. However, I do understand the concerns that were brought up by Councilwoman Grabowski. When we talk about special events like the Thanksgiving Day Parade, maybe staff can say, except for special events days where it's kind of obvious people are going to be hanging out in the median. I'm sure that staff is fully capable of organizing this in a way that is facially neutral, that understands that there's going to be the Thanksgiving Day Parade or other things where the majority of the town is out in a median. Aside from special event circumstances, I personally am not aware of an instance that I have just hung out in a street median. However, I can understand maybe a concern of, well, this is going to apply to people that are potentially well-meaning, but that's where we talk about that wonderful part of law enforcement where there's human consideration there. I'm not saying that someone standing in a median needs to be thrown in jail. I'm just saying, hey, this is against a town ordinance. This is potentially a safety risk for you. Get out of the median. And then if they don't, then we have a conversation about punishment. But from there, there's other issues. So at risk of rambling on this topic too much, I want to very clearly clarify that this is a primarily a safety concern, and then secondarily, trying to prevent other issues from arising from that point.
I think we all need to remember we're just...
Hold on, Alan. Jerry's going to speak first. Thanks.
I think we all need to remember that we're just here tonight to give direction to the staff. They'll bring something back, and then we can chew on it. So we're not passing an ordinance tonight. We're just giving staff direction. So I think they've got it. I think they've got the safety issue, and that should be addressed when they bring it back.
Thank you. I agree with that. The idea of whatever can be across the board and safety, median-wise. Alan, you said you had another, well, you had something to say, and then you had another suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, my only comment on that is that I specifically said median and not the right-of-way. You know, I know that there are some issues. I think legally you probably can stand on the right-of-way, and that is legal. You know, there's some places that say that it's not, because your right-of-way is usually moving, not just kind of blocking or, you know, loitering. But I specifically use the word median because that is not the part of the right-of-way. That's not someplace that is normally someplace you're traveling or walking and such. And that's why it is a safety issue. And you are right there next to traffic, and that's all. And so thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if we need to have a vote for this, or this is just a direction for staff.
I think that'd be great, Alan, because I think we can come up with something that would absolutely address median safety, right? Okay. Did you have another, a separate item, though, Alan?
Yes, Madam Mayor, and actually I wanted to direct staff to give us an opportunity to vote on word for word Glendale's ordinance. If we want to amend that during the meeting with discussion, that's fine, but I want to have opportunity to actually vote on and discuss the Glendale, aggressive panhandling ordinance.
So I know that we had a confidential memo on that, and I would not want to do that right now. I'm not prepared to go line by line with the Glendale ordinance because there are issues with that. But I think it's along the same lines of giving direction to where we want to go, where some of us might want to go, because there were definitely parts of that did not pass legal muster, but I don't feel prepared to go line by line now and determine that ourselves. Brenda?
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. As far as guidance is concerned, Aaron, I know that's been held by the Supreme Court that panhandling for charity is protected speech. If we went down the road of commerce, being that these people it's like a job, it's like a paycheck. Could we regulate this as commerce so the First Amendment protections wouldn't be so stringent?
Mayor and Councilwoman, there are cases that deal with that. The results from those cases are mixed. I think that you have a more reasonable chance of success with that type of a regulation. So if that's the path the council is going to go down collectively, I would encourage exploring an avenue like that as opposed to a strict panhandling prohibition, which frankly there has not been a single panhandling ordinance that survived constitutional muster since, constitutional scrutiny rather, since Reed versus Town of Gilbert. That they don't pass constitutional smell test anymore. So if we went down that direction, I would encourage the council to go the direction that Councilwoman Calavianakis is suggesting.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And I've discussed with Councilman Friedel possibly getting a permit, and this was Jerry's idea, or some kind of a medallion that they could establish. They could apply for a permit. They could take a training video, maybe wear a safety vest, and then since it is going to be commerce, again, time, place, and manner regulations, I think, would kick in. And then we could control something that otherwise we couldn't if we just, again, and Hannah's concern about safety is paramount. We're doing it because we want to keep everybody safe. And I also think it would not be a bad idea for us to have some kind of an ad hoc committee to study the safety implications of our ordinance. I think that would be reasonable. So it's just less of what we think, and we could point to a study, or we could point to people that have researched this and how this is going to make Fountain Hills a safer place to live.
Mayor and council, without getting too deep into it to prolong the discussion, the cases where those loitering or standing in the median ordinances have survived have relied on the data and not on the more nebulous ideas of what places are safe and what aren't. So I would also encourage the council to go that direction. But ultimately, we'll take whatever direction we're given tonight.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Alan.
Thank you for the time. One item that I'd like to address is that Reed versus Gilbert, that decision was made in 2015, and the makeup of the Supreme Court is quite different now, and we could probably expect a very different ruling. Now, I'm not suggesting that we want our town to be a test case and go all the way to the Supreme Court, even though I'm sure Aaron would love to argue in front of the Supreme Court on our behalf. But that's not my intention. I don't think that that's necessary. But I do think we should realize that the nature of the Supreme Court has changed. What is constitutional, what is not. Even though this ruling would be binding until another court says otherwise, I think it is not unfair to say that we can have something that will protect our towns from the situation, and also, we take legal advice for granted, but it is the council's job to actually craft a policy. That's why I would argue for this type of ordinance. I think we go with what Glendale has, word for word, and then we can make some changes here and there to fit our town. But I think we want to have a strong solution to this problem because, again, our house is on fire right now. We need to put out this fire.
I'm sorry, I have to say, I don't understand our house is on fire. I don't get that. I don't think it's a great analogy. I think it's very short-sighted. Yes, we have homeless people. When you leave Fountain Hills, there's a hell of a lot more. If you look at the, statistics, as a country, we average 18 homeless per 10,000 people. Arizona as a whole is at 18.42%, and that's according to usafacts.org. I don't see that our house is on fire. I don't understand that analogy. I'm sorry, I just had to say something.
Thank you. And it's not a sudden thing at all. We talked about Kiwanis earlier. We talked about the state trust land. These things have been status quo for a couple of years. I don't understand all of a sudden now it's like this house on fire situation. The people at Sunset Kiwanis, if they're not pursuing it, it's because it's been, like I say, this is not new. And yes, we want people safe. Yes, we want most people to get what they need to get back on their feet. But we're getting both stories here. Let's put them in jail. That'll help them get out of drugs. But we don't want to put them in New Leaf or any other place, so we don't want to pay for that. But we certainly don't want them here. So, okay, this is just a very complex situation that a lot of cities are going through. We have that much of it here. We're trying to address it. This tonight was to move forward so that we come back with something legal, reasonable, safe, respectful of everybody. And that's the intention of this tonight. not to tell people to go to jail or that we wish they were having their interactions with law enforcement. I mean, if they are a bigger percentage that are on drugs or alcohol, then that needs to be addressed on that level. And it sounded to me like Captain Kratzer and, I'm sorry, Taryn are on the right track there. I mean, these generalizations that none of these things are working, that MAG's been doing that, all these mayors of all parties and all feelings about this issue come together and realize that it's not black and white, it's not easy to fix. So I'm not in favor of going for Glendale after we have memos telling us exactly how that's not going to work. I don't want to be in the public eye as the town that took the stand and went to the Supreme Court. We have Reed versus Town of Gilbert. That's what we have right now. That's what exists. Anything that we enact is for everybody in this town, as it should be. Yes, ma'am.
We sit here in the public talking about this. We're talking about homelessness, and now we're talking about an ordinance based on safety, which it's obvious to me that you're targeting homeless people. We may have a couple homeless people in town. I think one of the statistics that Amy said today is per 25,000 people, there's 27. I mean, I think we might have 3 or 4, et cetera. I don't think it's out of hand. I don't appreciate what I'm going to say, I think is the mob mentality in reaction to this. I think if we really want to look at our ordinances about washes, et cetera, that's more realistic than sitting here pretending like we're not talking about homeless people and enacting an ordinance to prevent them from being in Fountain Hills. There's no gate to the city here. Anybody can come in and out of our town. And I don't know how, realistically, we're going to sit here and stop people who might be unsheltered from coming into our town. I think it's unrealistic.
Mayor, if I can, there's been a lot of discussion, and I just want to make sure, I've been taking a lot of notes, but at this point, copious amounts indeed. And I do want to try to bookend where, and I realize this conversation has sort of meandered, but staff is willing to take a start of drafting something. Again, it is a draft so that it is reviewable, it is editable, it is a draft so that the council can use it as a starting point. It can be wordsmithed from there. It can be again addressed, but what we'll use as our guiding tools is the idea of safety and a commerce-oriented, as I heard you say, a commerce-oriented approach. And then if we can work towards, if an ad hoc committee is the right tool to use to create that data point. I also think we need to include MCSO in this conversation and what they've had success implementing and in terms of enforcement and things like that, because ultimately whatever we do draft and adopt, they're going to be that enforcement arm for us, so they need to be part of that conversation too. So what I'm hearing is the direction to staff to start on this process. We'll be bringing it back again as a draft for future consideration. Does that sound accurate to everyone? Okay, great.
Thank you. Any other comments? Our next item is a consideration of reviewing and possible direction to the staff on sign code ordinance. John, thank you.
Just a second here.
Thank you, Amy, for coming.
Okay, Mayor and Council, good to see you this evening. Just a very quick background here. February 9th, the Council reinstated the sign ordinance. During the discussion of that, there was also discussion about relaxed enforcement of the sign regulations with regard to temporary signs. Based on the discussion and the motion at the council meeting, staff initially did not enforce any rules with regard to temporary signs, but over time we have started to pick up some of the enforcement. First of all, with some of the sign types that really weren't allowed in the ordinance, and then based on some issues that came up with regard to certain yard signs, sometimes termed bandit signs, we started doing more enforcement there. But because we can't really single out one sign versus another based on message, it really turned into all yard signs and directional signs. The motion that was made at the council meeting it's not entirely clear, and so we're back this evening seeking kind of further direction now that we've had several months of trying not to enforce it or enforce it on a more limited basis. Just also as a note, the P&Z Commission is still reviewing an update to the sign ordinance. We had a good discussion at their meeting this month. They gave me several things to work on, given some of the vacations and such that the commission members are taking. We weren't really going to have another full commission meeting until September, so there won't be any further action by the P&Z Commission until September. So it'll be several more months past that before we get to council. So again, that's the reason why we're back here this evening, to make sure we're enforcing the regulations as the council would really like. So I've listed here some options from one end to the other end of extremes. So one would be to clearly direct the enforcement of the type that you want to have, starting with basically no enforcement, to make it clear you really don't want us to enforce any sign regulations. And then from there, there's some steps in between where we could have limited enforcement based on some of the characteristics, the type of sign, the location of signs, or the material of signs. But again, we can't really regulate based on message. Or we could go back to full enforcement of the sign ordinance with regard to temporary signs.
Thank you. Do we have any speaker cards on this item?
No, Mayor, we do not.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
John, if you could clarify for me, your first slide mentioned that the council's motion was unclear. I remember the motion being extremely clear that temporary signs were not to be enforced. We were then kind of announced too that there'd be some enforcement, and I think that's where there's been some confusion. And I have to be honest, I predicted the part of the reason I voted against reinstating in the first place was because I knew this would end up on an agenda soon. So frankly, I'm a little insulted that we're trying to just put the sign ordinance back in as it is without something ready to put in as the changes that we've suggested. I'm a no vote on any of this, but I just want to ask you specifically, John, I apologize for getting ahead of myself, but specifically, what was the confusion with the council's motion on temporary signs?
Mayor, Councilmember, I went back and re-listened to the full meeting to make sure I understood what we were to enforce and not. There's a lot of debate back and forth about what the motion meant and what was really covered in the motion, and I couldn't get really 100% clear understanding of what the council really meant with the motion. And again, so we started with the idea, okay, then we really aren't enforcing anything with regard to any temporary signs. But again, from then, as some situations have occurred, we've been asked to enforce some pieces of it.
Thank you, John. I have a follow-up to that. The kind of announcement that we received that there would be some enforcement on temporary signs after the motion and vote to not enforce temporary signs. How did that come about, and why was that not required to be a vote? The email was pretty much just letting us know that that would happen.
I'll be happy to chime in on that one. At this point, we're getting challenged as to, we have an ordinance. Why are we not enforcing it? And that leaves staff in a very gray area of, if we have an ordinance, we have a responsibility to enforce it. So in conversation, the area that we're getting the most complaints about are the temporary signs, are about signage. And to John's point, and to the confusion of the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion about not just the type of sign, but the material the sign was being used, or the material that was being used, and what was considered durable and what was considered not. And are cardboard yard sale signs okay? Yes, they are. No, they're not. Well, I don't think they should be. There is a lot of discussion in there, and it's definitely leaves staff in a no-win situation in that regard. So we took the most common complaint that we're having. We just said, let's start talking about how we can use this. And at the end of the day, we're going into a summer break where we need to have some clarity if we're going to enforce everything, if we're going to enforce nothing, or if we're going to enforce something in between. We'd like to make sure that we are on that same page with you guys.
Sure. So, sorry, one more time. That meeting where we had plenty of discussion, that was regarding the new sign ordinance. Is that correct? The changes that we are going to make? Because the last time that we voted on this current ordinance, there was a vote where we said no enforcement of temporary signs, but we'll bring it back. And then from there, we discussed changes for a new ordinance. So is that where the confusion is the discussion for the new ordinance rather than how we're enforcing this current one?
Mayor, Councilmember Toth. No, it's with the discussion that happened on February the 9th to reinstate the ordinance. Again,
Okay.
There was lots of discussion there that left the motion unclear in my mind.
Okay, thank you, John. So in that case, I would suggest that we go off of the vote that occurred. There was a majority vote for bringing the ordinance back, but with no enforcement of temporary signage, so.
The suggestion of, well, when we repealed it, and then we realized that was not something we should have done, it was not a legal action, so we reinstated it in February, and there was some discussion about what the signs could be made out of and such, because we realized that by not enforcing anything, we left ourselves open. So, and it was a little hard to figure out where we landed on that. As far as the rest of that decision, the original decision to repeal it was with an understanding that we were going to get this reformulated sign ordinance back in like a month. So we were like, okay, when's planning and zoning meeting? When we have to have 15 days of a hearing? So this whole time frame was very, very short. So then we reinstated it and said, okay, we're going to get this thing back right away. Well, they've discussed it a few times, and I don't blame them. I mean, I watched a little bit of the last meeting, and you, Commissioner, was there, and I appreciated your comments and such, to know that they weren't going to get anywhere as far as like coming forward that night. Besides, it was on the 12th, so it was too late for us anyway. So now that it's going to be September, we find ourselves in the position of feather signs, box signs, signs on boxes. An election is going to be in, we have sanitary district and a bond election. We have for rent signs with no vacancy strapped across them. We have sidewalks being blocked. We have multiple signs in a row. So it's proliferating. You just sent us this memorandum, and from last December, so you could pretty much say it wasn't an election anymore, you had 88 sign, activities, whether they were removed or returned. And, now we have 0, of course, or we started to pick up a little bit because of, the decision to do a little bit. So 88, much more before that, but that was an election, so I want to be fair and not use that. But this is the road we're on, and we've got June, July, August, September, so by the time we get one back here, we're going to have a lot of months of no enforcement of temporary signs. And so it's not an insult to bring it back. It wasn't meant to be an insult to bring it back. What it was to clarify where are we right now, and when these signs start coming for November, what are we going to be? We're going to start seeing them on Shea again. We're going to start seeing them in medians again, which we already have, and all these other violations. And I don't think we want to look at that for the next 6 months. Councilwoman?
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Hold on, Brenda's gone first.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. I'll be brief. Yeah, I do recall that I think our message was fairly clear to staff at the time, and so I do concur with Hannah. On the other hand, since then, and speaking with our town manager and with town staff, I'm convinced in good faith that there was a lack of guidance that at least they've received. And so I think it's tricky that we thought the message was conveyed properly, and I don't think at this point it was, because I've heard too many complaints from staff to say we don't have any guidance on this. I live here, and I've noticed the proliferation of a lot of signs that we originally thought about the proliferation of, and it was distressing. And so I specifically remember what the mayor said, that this is going to take a month or two, it'll go through planning and zoning, it's going to get bumped up here, we're going to have a new sign ordinance. And now it's languishing, it's going to be in September now before it's done. I've sat in on the planning and zoning, or I've watched them on YouTube, and it's a very slow, tedious process of them trying to cobble together our new sign ordinance. I'm okay with instructing the staff to resume the full sign ordinance enforcement as of tonight. With the only adjustment or amendment to that would be, I would like for it to be to a time certain, a shot clock, if you will, that we would reinstate the sign ordinance until probably maybe November, the second meeting of November. That would give planning and zoning a chance to take a look at it in September, possibly kick it back to council, and then we can have a vote on it at that time. If we need additional time, we could also just bump it to January and do a second extension. So what I would like to do is move to instruct staff to resume the full sign code enforcement up until a date certain, that date to be determined tonight by council.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Councilman Skillicorn?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I distinctly remember that February meeting is that there was a compromise that was made. And, who knew that signs would be so controversial? But that compromise that was made was allow us to have an ordinance but not have enforcement. And I still think that was clear. So I have a contrary motion is to table this until we have something from planning and zoning that we can work on.
I know we have a motion and a second on the floor. We're checking.
Yeah, it might just be the regular, just a motion, and we would be without amendment.
Okay, thanks for your patience, Mayor and Council. I was making sure we handled this correctly. So I'm looking at Rule 6.6 C2 of our Council Rules of Procedure, which govern precedence of motions. We have a motion and a second on the table. Under Section C, subsection C2, motions to table or postpone to a certain date and time take precedence over the main motion. Did we get a second on the motion to table, though? That's the question. Okay.
I'll second that.
So then we would vote on the motion to table first. And so if you want to table, vote yes. If you don't want to table, vote no. And then if that motion fails, we will proceed to vote on Councilwoman Kalavianakis' motion. That makes sense?
Yes.
We're voting on the motion to table.
There's a motion to table on the floor. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
No.
Councilmember Friedel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kalavianakis.
No.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Yes to table.
Councilmember Toth.
Yes.
Vice Mayor McMahon.
No.
Mayor Dickey.
No.
It fails. 4-3.
Okay. So we have the motion on the table to enforce the ordinance of full enforcement of ordinance on temporary signs until our second
meeting in November? Yeah.
How about,
Too long.
how about the first meeting in November? Because I'm not sure about our second meeting because of Thanksgiving things.
I still think that's too long, even. Why can't we do it in October?
Well, I think the key is, John, is that going to give planning and zoning enough time? I mean, that's the key. We need them before we can do our job.
Mayor, Council, we'll be back, we'll be back to P&Z in September with revisions to the ordinances. They've been looking at it. If they would approve it that night, then we could have it at your second meeting in October. If they're still not ready to approve it, then it'll go to their next meeting in October and keep going until they're ready to take action.
I think you're fine with what you said.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Mayor. I think that if planning and zoning bumped it up in September and then we were to vote on it in October, it would replace the one that we're resuming tonight. It would, by necessity, it would obviate the need for this old sign ordinance to be applied. The new sign ordinance would then go into effect. Yeah.
So in other words, if she says, still keeps it on the first meeting in November, if we got it sooner, we can always do it, right? Yeah. Okay.
Precisely.
So there's a motion on the floor and a second for full enforcement of the ordinance on temporary signs until our first meeting in November. We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Toth.
Madam Mayor, may I explain my vote?
Sure.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I ran on changing this sign ordinance. I understand that it's taking longer than necessary, but as Councilman Skillicorn pointed out, we had made an agreement in that last meeting, and I voted against that because I predicted this exact moment. And I have a couple councilmen that are aware of that as well. I knew this would happen. My vote is no.
Councilmember Grzybowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Fidel.
No.
Councilmember Kalavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
No.
Vice Mayor McMahon. Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you all.
It passes.
Motion passes. Our next item is a public hearing. I shall open the public hearing and talk about a zoning change. Hi.
Hi. Madam Mayor, just give me just a second. Great. Okay, Madam Mayor, members of the council, what you have before you is a rezone request for a little over 8/10 of an acre dual zone property in the Fire Rock subdivision. The proposal is to rezone it from R135H, which is a single family residential, and OSR to a uniform R135H uniformly zoned property. So the property, which I'll just go ahead and show you here on the next slide, is about a little over 37,000 square feet. It's one parcel. It was actually replatted late last year. The vast majority of it, about 20,000 acres or so, is, or I beg your pardon, more like 30,000 acres, or square feet, pardon me, it's a little late, is zoned R135H, and about 7,700 acres is zoned OSR, or Open Space Reserve. So what the applicant, again, is proposing a uniform zoning, R135H. Now, you may ask, what is the purpose of this rezoning? The applicant wishes to make it addition to the existing primary residence that's on the property. However, with the previous lot configuration, those additions would have bust the 20% lot coverage limit. So what the applicant did with the agreement from the Fire Rock HOA is to basically transfer a portion of the Fire Rock Country Club's property to the owner of the lot, so that basically would be it was an expansion of the lot to 37,000 square feet. So the recommendation before you from staff as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission is to approve the zone change request to create a uniformly zoned R135H zone parcel, which would allow the applicant to make additions without exceeding the lot coverage limit. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. The applicant is here waiting patiently, I might add. And I'll turn it back to you.
Question for you, did Fire Rock just give them that land?
I'm not, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedel, I'm not sure what exactly what the arrangement was, but I don't think it was just simply.
It wasn't just a donation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have any speaker cards? I'm sorry.
This is just for a private residence, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
No, Mayor, we don't.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions? No? Could,
I'd like to make a motion.
I'm going to close the hearing.
Oh, sorry.
Remember this time. Now make a motion.
Move to adopt ordinance 2308.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Friedel.
Aye.
Councilmember Calavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Yes.
Councilmember Toth.
Aye.
Councilmember Guzbowski.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McMahon. Aye. Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is to change the name of the, how should I say it? The Historic and Cultural Advisory Commission. Who's doing this one? Rachel?
Yep, I can take this one. The commission was founded, I want to say the first of the year, give or take. And at the inception of the commission, a number of the commissioners wanted to reevaluate the name because it is in a resolution. It does require council direction and approval to do so. Again, I think they take exception with creating a grammatically correct commission title. And actually, I think what they would prefer, and I could be wrong, and I believe we have a comment card on it, is they would prefer the Historic and Culture Commission? History and Culture.
History
See, that's why
and
you shouldn't
culture.
ask me. That's why I should read something.
History and Culture.
History and Culture Advisory Commission. So it still keeps the same initials. It's just a semantics tweak.
Thank you. Do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, Mayor, we do, but it's just written comments, and you have one from Diane Price. She's for the name change, but she's the one who points out that it should be History and Culture.
Yes.
And then Rory Wilson is for the name change.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Can I get a motion? I think.
Not discussion, just a motion. Everybody can let out their breath. In that case, I move to change the name of the commission to the History and Culture Commission as per Ms. Price's comment.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Okay, Councilmember Calavianakis.
Aye.
Councilmember Skillicorn.
Yes.
Councilmember Toth.
Aye.
Councilmember Guzbowski.
Aye.
Councilmember Friedel.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McMahon. Mayor Dickey.
Aye. Thank you. So our last regular item is relating to the legislative, the League's legislative bulletin. I wanted to thank everybody for reporting from their policy committees. I look forward to seeing what moves forward. I do have some things to say. So there are 162 bills that have been signed into law. They adjourned last Monday and will reconvene July 31st. They were off for about 5 weeks earlier until June 12th. And I know people have been asking this, and they do get paid their per diem. And the bills will not become law now in a timely manner because the effective date for legislation is 90 days post sine die, and they won't be back again until July 31st. Last week, 2 league resolutions did pass the legislature with strong bipartisan majorities, so what you're doing now is formulating that for next year. Lawmakers debated the 1246, which is the election for the transportation tax, and the governor has announced her intention to veto it. It was the one that was negotiated by mayors and such, but the bill was a lot different from that. So I don't know if she actually did or not, because I wrote this yesterday. 1131, which was the residential leases municipal tax exemption, was approved. The governor had vetoed a similar measure earlier this year, and again, it would have an estimated impact of $230 million to the 75 cities and towns that levy this tax. In Fountain Hills, it would be about $500,000, a little bit more every year in revenue. All 3 of the zoning preemption bills, they did not get voted on. They all failed to move. And then yesterday, the governor signed Senate Bill 1432, which sets up the Standpipe District that will enter into an agreement with the city of Scottsdale to allow Rio Verde Foothills community members on hauled water to draw from the standpipe. And I asked Aaron earlier, and this bill will have no impact on the town of Fountain Hills. So that's good, and hopefully they will get that solution up and running. Anything else on that?
I just very quickly
Yes,
on that.
ma'am.
Is that going to offer the Rio Verde a temporary solution in addition to a permanent solution? I mean, are they going to get water this summer? From what your understanding is, I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that might take a while is to to form the group there that's going to be the sort of the layer of government for it. But once they do that, it will be temporary leading to permanent. So it shouldn't be that much different from what they were getting as far as getting the water, and they're trying to do it as quickly as they can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did you, Jerry, did you have more news about that? Oh, okay. Any other direction to the town manager or future agenda items for August 22nd? Thank you. So we have, did someone say we have no future?
Way future.
I have no future. So again, we have the skate park on Saturday. Thank you. Vice Mayor will be there on my behalf, and I'm sure you guys will be there. 4th of July, music starts at 7:30, fireworks at 9. Have a fun, safe summer. We're here, though. We're not going anywhere. You can always reach us. And again, have a great summer. Thank you. We're adjourned.